Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Chatting with Nuts. This is episode number 34, and it's actually been almost exactly 20 episodes since I brought my guest back. This is his second appearance, and he is actually one of my very good friends that now we have actually met in the real world. He is not an AI, and that is a Critical Dragon. AP, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing very well. And you now know the truth, that I'm not just a torso that floats in a virtual void. There is a second half to me. It's not substantial, but it's there.
Everyone told me, they said, man, because, we posted pictures of us getting together, and we had Philip and Joanna and Alan and Mr. Erickson. Mr. Steven Erickson was there as well. And tons of other people at that conference who were wonderful. And people were surprised that I was taller than you.
Well, it's my staggering intellect, obviously. I'm an intellectual giant. And obviously, my physical form must try and contain that.
What's interesting, because I have a fat head, like a very fat head, but it's mostly empty or scar tissue. I haven't figured out exactly what the makeup is of my brain yet. But yeah, we haven't talked, on a stream since we have met in real life, and it was a wonderful time down in Florida meeting you and everyone else, and obviously Philip, your arch nemesis, was there, and he was okay. He was fine.
The aged hobbit that he is.
Yes, the decrepit old hobbit, Philip Chase.
Well, I have to say,
so fun.
That trip to Florida was so much fun. Just getting to sit and chat and relax, and it was seeing someone in real life. You had that split second of, oh, they are actually a real person, and then you realize, no, those conversations we had, like on this and the little bit before or after that we've chatted, the email exchanges we've had, you go, yeah, this is a friend, and it was so relaxed and natural, and it's basically a changed almost attitude to how we think of friendship in the modern day, that we can have friends from all over the world now. Whereas before, if you think even 50 years ago, the idea of having these friends all over the world who you talk to on a regular basis, who you know what they look like, you know part of their lives. Technology has shaped and changed that so much. And it's absolutely wonderful that we have this ability where I should be in bed and we're going to sit and chat about books and literature and narrative.
Yeah, and honestly, I would even say that through the pandemic and everything, being home, I think it even further normalized the fact that we can establish really meaningful things over the internet. And there is like some sort of I don't know, it's like the veil kind of comes down when you meet in person, though. You know what I mean? Like, it's different now that I've met you, and it did feel very natural. It felt like a continuation of something like this, and we picked up right where we left off, and it wasn't really awkward at all.
But Jimmy, what I'm picking up from that is when you met me in person, you went, I used to have respect for him. Like he was on this YouTube channel and he was saying these profound things, and now I've met him in person and he's an ass.
I was happy to know that if I needed to, I could pick you up and throw you like that. That's all I really need out of just like my monkey brain. That's very Conan of me, but it's just how I think. I'm like, okay, I can pick him up. We're good. I just remember sneaking up to Philip. So I was going to sneak attack Philip. I saw him at the front desk. I'd been wandering around the conference for about 2 hours by myself trying to find you. And
I told you we sit out the back.
I thought, here's the thing, folks. At this conference, there's a genius. I mean, geniuses everywhere. And they're walking around. They're giving these amazing talks. So I said, surely AP will be in one of the halls listening to some of these people talk. AP's back at the pool. He's getting some sun.
Well, to be in my defense, I wasn't getting any sun. I was sitting in the shade, because one of the ways that people know that I'm nearby is if I walk out into direct sunlight. They go, can anyone else smell bacon? As the Irishman burns to a crisp in the Florida sun.
Yeah, that's one thing I didn't know. I didn't know Ireland didn't have a sun. I had no idea until I met you.
It's one of those that people go like, are you a vampire? And you go, I make vampires look tanned.
It's true. It's true.
And this is it. I have to now. I am not having a dig at the Wheel of Time, but when Robert Jordan described the Isle as the ginger-haired people living in a desert, I went, he needed to go to Ireland to look at a beach Because when you see it, it's like the sunlight comes out for half an hour and all the Irish people run to the beach and the sunlight hits our skin. And it's like the beacons of Gondor have been lit. And and then within half an hour, everyone is bright red.
You get 30 minutes of vitamin D a year. And if you miss it, you miss it. All right? There's no repeats. All right. You got to go get it.
You know that red color that lobsters go? That's 30 minutes in the sun for an Irish person.
Well, I mean, you were bad in the sun all day, and finally, you know, Janie Wirtz came over and said, "AP, you need to go inside, my friend." She put her foot down.
Yeah, a little bit of let's call it heat exhaustion.
We'll go with that. I think you were bordering on heat stroke at that point.
The next 2 days, I sat with a plastic bag just full of ice down my back, leaking slowly down as the ice melted, just leaking down, ice cold water leaking down my back in order to try and keep cool.
And this guy is such a gentleman, folks. He wore a button up the whole time. Like me, I would have had a tank top on or something. He said, "Nope, I'm still gonna wear a button up."
But what part of I burn in sunlight? I'm not doing it because I was trying to look like fashionable. I was doing it because I need the protection from the evil sunlight.
You know who's fashionable though? Steven Erickson knows how to dress.
Yeah.
My goodness, what a dapper fellow he is, huh?
To be perfectly honest, he's a git.
he's a absolute pleasure of a human being to be around, not just as an author, but just as a human being. It was great him being down there and then talking to Stephen Donaldson. I mean, that was absolutely incredible, really. I mean, not something I ever thought that would happen in my lifetime, for sure. So pretty amazing.
And that, like, one of the great things that I love about that conference, not only, you know, meeting up with my friends and meeting up with other scholars, and you're sitting, and when we talk about books and we do all of the sorts of different types of analysis and we talk about trends, but you also get to sit with authors and we can talk about their work like that. But also then you meet authors as people. It's not, I think sometimes we have this idea of an author that they sit in a garret somewhere and the muse strikes them and they sit and type away and they create this work of art. And then we go out, we devour it because we love books. And then we see them and they're in a bookshop doing a signing and you go up and you go, "Can you sign this?" And they aren't really real people. And then at this conference, because you have the time, you're sitting with them and you get to meet them as people. And then suddenly it's not just about their books, but their relationship to narrative in all these different forms of film and television and the things that influenced them when they were younger and all of the things that influence us. Like, they have the same things. And it takes conversations in a different light, because as an academic, we can get very locked into a particular view of narrative where there's the product that we are analyzing. But when you sit with authors, they're talking about the creation. And it's looking at it from a different direction. And suddenly, for an academic, for someone who studies it, it gives you a different insight. And it's one of these beautiful things that when people say, like, if you want to be a better reader, like, we always recommend, like, read more, read widely. Yeah. Another way to become a better reader is to try to write. Because as soon as you try to put it on, try and, like, even a simple scene in your head, because everyone can imagine, like, a simple scene, like meeting a friend in a coffee shop. Now try and write one page that gets across the sense of that coffee shop, that sense of your friend, and a little bit of dialogue. Just try and get it across on the page. Then look at what you've written, and you actually understand the process more from having tried it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why, even when I'm not super active in my writing, mainly because I haven't found time. But, you know, I chip away. But one of the things that's made me a better reader is reading these books like Le Guin's Steering the Craft, right? Like those type of things actually make me understand the intent sometimes, or maybe even the rules that the authors are trying to break is also a really fascinating thing to see, especially from some of my favorite authors. So you're like, oh, I see what you're doing there. That's really interesting. So I do think peeling back the veil does help, even as a reader, even if you don't have aspirations to be published or anything like that.
No, it comes with the caveat that as soon as you start learning about this stuff, it does change how you read.
100%. That's pro wrestling. Same thing.
which can be a good thing because, and the biggest benefit I find is even in books that you may not personally go, I really enjoyed that it wasn't really your cup of tea, but you suddenly get an appreciation for the craftsmanship, for the artistry. And, you know, there may be someone out there who is a massive fan of Jane Austen, and the person sitting next to them goes, oh, I can't read that stuff. Yeah. But as soon as you're aware of a lot of the techniques of writing, even if you don't enjoy the story that Austen is telling, very often you can appreciate and enjoy how she tells that story. And it is very hard to describe. I described it one time as not enjoying a piece of music, and a friend explained the music to me, and I listened to it basically with new ears.
Oh, yeah.
That I still wouldn't have gone, oh, yeah, I'm going to go out and buy that album.
I do this all the time. Okay. So I used to be really into hip hop. Like, I mean, in on hip hop. And I knew all of the beefs. I knew like subliminal disses in rap tracks. And I would explain it to my wife, or at the time girlfriend. We'd be on the road for my wrestling. And I'd be like, no, this line here is sick. And then she'd listen to me like, what? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. He's referencing a song that they did 10 years ago that then coordinates with this, you know, and she's just looking at me like, oh, okay. You know, she didn't have the appreciation, but it's kind of the same idea.
But the downside to all this is suddenly some of your favorite reads from when you were younger that you look at now and you go, I like the story, but this is becoming more difficult to read because I'm seeing more jagged edges to things.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is a bridge I want to take, because I've been saying this. I'm somewhere between the casual reading experience and the snobbery. Like, I'm somewhere in between these two things. I tend to lean more towards the casual side, because I do feel as if sometimes, and I'm not saying you, but I'm just saying people who do have a good sense of literature and you know, how the craft is actually executed, will look at something that is maybe a little bit lesser, right? I'm just going to throw out a thing. I've actually never read this, but I've just seen this happen to this piece of work before, and it's Aragon, right, by Christopher Paolini. It is what it is, right? No one's saying it's the most grandiose thing ever, but a lot of people say, well, you know, I still like it. I understand that it's bad, but I still like it. Isn't that okay? So, like, is there a bridge somewhere we can have where having a good time is fine? You know what I mean?
Well, but this is something I've talked about before, in that there's nothing to say that you cannot enjoy something. Like, we can make the food analogy. Sometimes you want to sit down at a 7-course Michelin star meal, where there's silver service and the most beautiful surroundings and gentle chamber music playing in the background, and you're served on a cloud of heavenly aromas, you know, and you go, yeah, that's amazing. And then other times you go, well, I really want a cheeseburger, and I want a cheeseburger from that greasy van that's down the road that the health inspectors never quite get to because they drive away. But that's what I'm in the mood for. Now, you can love the cheeseburger that comes from that greasy van. You can go, I really enjoy it. It filled the need that I had. I have fond memories of that cheeseburger. But you wouldn't describe it as, yes, it was an excellent meal. You go, no, it was a greasy cheeseburger. Let's be honest about it. But I really, Philip, veggie, that is, no, that is not the same. But we're honest about it, where we go, we don't pretend that the greasy cheeseburger is an amazing meal. We just go, it hit the spot for what I needed it to do. Yeah. And we have exactly the same thing in literature. There is a joy in a story that, for whatever reason, be it the style it is written in, the characters that are in it, what happens in it, for whatever reason, that story speaks to us. It made us happy. It engaged us. It elicited emotion. It touched our lives for whatever reason. And we can love that. And for a certain generation of readers, that was Aragon. They read that book, and there's nostalgia now in looking at it. But you don't pretend that it is a brilliantly written, highly original work.
Right.
Because it in all those metrics, it isn't. But that doesn't detract its importance to you, and it doesn't detract from the enjoyment that you can get from it. Literature, on the one hand, is about a very personal reading experience, because you take this written work that an author has created and you give it meaning and resonance in your own mind. You have interpreted it. You spend time with it. You are immersed in it. And if that time has given you joy or enjoyment or happiness or any of those things, that you go, that was time well spent. And it doesn't matter if it was the world's greatest book. It doesn't matter, because you enjoyed it. But you then don't go, yes, but this was fantastically crafted and the prose is genius. Because you're looking at it going, no, it's not. But I liked it. And that's fine.
Yeah. You know what I think, what I was trying to say, because I'm tracking everything you're saying. When people, I've seen this happen, when people say, well, this is literature, but this is not. And I don't believe that, because even Ursula Le Guin, who is a very big proponent of high quality writing, she really believed that prose was part of the cake batter or whatever she said. She believed that there's a lot of effort that goes into high art. I think she still even acknowledges that it's all art, but the great stuff stands alone. So like, it's not like when we start picking what's literature and what isn't, then like we've kind of lost ourselves at that point, because some people think, maybe Malazin's not great. I happen to think it's fantastic, but you see what I mean?
Yeah. And I will always come down on the fact that if you've read a book and you've enjoyed it, that it has done something for you, then it was worthwhile reading.
Mm-hmm.
When we get into arguments about what is literature with a capital L, you're like, for the vast majority of us, you just go, oh, go away. Like that is not an important consideration.
Yeah.
If you're getting into evaluations about whether or not the writing is good, then you have to start considering a lot more of the technical aspects.
Yeah.
If you're getting into evaluations of trying to critique something, then awareness of a whole bunch of other things is much more important. But literature has always been, like all forms of media, all forms of art, things that appeal to lots of people and things that appeal to small niche groups.
Yeah.
It is always the range. And we talk about gatekeeping. And it used to be this idea of the elite gatekeeping and saying, oh, we're going to say what is good and everyone else must follow.
Right.
But gatekeeping has changed now, because it's not the elite saying who is a fan and who is a true fan and who is not a real fan. That's not the elite doing that. That's us. That's all of us making decisions about who is allowed in the fandom.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, no, if someone likes a book, they are just as much a fan of that work. They might know as much as you or I. They might know more than you or I. But if we love the book, if it has been special to us, like, we can be fans of that book without having memorized the length of so-and-so's sword to the cubit or whatever. It's
what sword are we talking about, AP?
I have no idea. Ubala Plung. But these arguments where people try to carve out exceptionalism for the thing that they love,
yes,
and denigrate everything else. And you go, you don't have to denigrate things to celebrate the thing that you love.
I relate to that so much,
because that is one way of doing it. You go, here's the thing I love. If I make everything else look shit, my thing looks amazing. But the other way of doing it is go, I really love it.
Yeah, so I'm a pretty big fan of R. Scott Baker in A Second Apocalypse. I'm in book 2 of his follow-up series, The Aspect Emperor. And like, man, I'm in on this second series. But one of the things I see a lot of the times, because the fandom for it is like awesome, like they're dedicated to it. And it's a niche, right? Like it's a small group of people that really love this work. And I happen to see a lot of people, when they bring it up or they try to prop it up, they try to tear the rest of the genre down. And you're free to do that. And I understand what they're trying to say, but as someone who reads a lot of these things and enjoy a lot of these things, right? I always say, you might be turning off prospective readers possibly by doing that.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that it's come up because of all of these different adaptations as well, but even bad TV adaptations, and I think most people would agree that, say, the Sword of Truth series, Legend of the Seeker,
not great,
was not a particularly interesting adaptation. B, wasn't a particularly good TV show, as two separate metrics that we're looking at. But even that caused an increase of sales for the books and led to the fandom getting more attention and more normalized and expanding. And you go, so even bad adaptations are good in some way. And while there are always going to be books that we love personally and we think are absolutely amazing and everyone should read them, and dude, if you don't read this, this changed my life and this will reach down into your soul and it will break you, I was shook, and various other things that sound completely and utterly unnatural when I try to say them.
Yes.
But the other person might read it and go, I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, the thing that's hard for us then is to say, oh, well, that's fine. And I get this a lot with Malazan, because the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the novels of the Malazan Empire and the work that Erikson and Asimov have created is incredibly special to me. And I love these books. I love aspects of their writing. I like what they were trying to do. I like what they created. I like how it fitted as a conversation with the genre. There are all of these different aspects. And then someone says, I didn't enjoy it. And I am perfectly happy saying, okay. Like,
fair enough.
That's fine. One of the things that drives me nuts is, well, I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. And you're like, well, what book do you recommend to everyone? That's not a thing. It's actually just a vacuous statement that makes Malazan out to be some sort of elite thing. And you go, no, it's like any other fantasy series. It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, depending on who you are as a reader. But that series to me is incredibly important. I like talking about the technical aspects of the writing. I like talking about how it was doing something different to a lot of other things. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy other works, but I don't slag off other works to try and make Malazan look better. Mm-hmm. And it's an incredibly special series for me, and I am a fan. But as you know, this is my second time reading it. I haven't read this hundreds of times. I had read it once.
You know, Alan has read the first 6 like 6 times.
Yeah, he's read more Malazan than I have.
Isn't that wild?
But the other thing that frustrates me is you frequently say, "Oh, you will only understand it on a reread," and I'm like, I was fine the first time.
I got it.
It's like, did I make every single connection that Erikson put in, every single Easter egg, No, I didn't. But you can still read it the first time and understand the books. That's not the issue.
I see this with A Song of Ice and Fire as well. People say, well, you'll start to see the other stuff. And it's true in the sense that other pieces will jump out to you because you're not so worried about understanding the A to the B to the C, and then sometimes you go back to A and then go to Z and then come back to D in Malazan. You know, it gets a little crazy.
R plus L equals J. Like, I mean,
supposedly we don't know anything, right? But yeah, I've always felt that way. It's like, no, you can get it on a read, and I feel this way about Malazan as well. It's like, but a reread could be a very worthwhile experience, but not necessary to just enjoy as a story, at least in my opinion.
And then on rereading it, yes, you will gain more knowledge. Mm-hmm. You will suddenly see that you will have more context for things. You will understand things better. But that's not the same as saying you need to reread it. it's not the same thing as saying, oh, okay, read through it once, get that out of the way, and then start your reread. You go, that is just insane.
Well, I think it's all figuring out how you're going to speak about something. Whenever you make a video or whatever, if you're writing down a blog or whatever it might be, is that, words do matter. They matter a lot. And for the perceived audience, the reason why what we do here on YouTube is I don't want to use the word important. That seems a little, but like the reason why people like what we do is that there are so many books out there. And I remember specifically whenever I moved here, I remember walking into the Barnes & Noble just because it was like in the front of the mall and it's a really cool Barnes & Noble. I walked in with my wife and I said, man, I just want to get back into reading so bad. I said, but look at all these books. I said, and it takes so much time to read a book. I don't want to waste my time. Like that is the worst sin that a piece of entertainment can do for you is waste your time. Right. And I'm like, how many of these are good? I remember saying that to her. And I said, if only there was some way to curate books that I might enjoy. And now here we are.
But interestingly enough, you walk into that and you go, how many of these are good? I will guarantee you that all of those books are good, just not necessarily books that you will enjoy.
Yes. And even because that, right, phrasing.
Yeah, there will be someone who you will go, I wasted my time on this book. The evil book. It stole my life. And you'll throw it to the ground. You will jump up and down it. Someone else will pick it up and go, you're an idiot. This is amazing. Because they're looking for a different experience. They're connecting to it in a different way. And when we get into these discussions about what is a good book, what is a bad book, I sometimes get a little frustrated because there are technical things that you can talk about, but that is usually that is not the important thing for the majority of readers. They want to know if they're going to enjoy it. And that's why you talk about aspects of a book that they might like or they might dislike, that you give them the information and they can make up their mind, or they find someone who has similar tastes. And then if they recommend that, you go, oh, well, if they liked it, I'll probably like it.
Yes. And that adds a certain level of betrayal whenever, for instance, like if I were to review something and say, this is awesome, and someone who's aligned with me all last 6 months goes and reads and go, this was shit. Like what? I can't trust Jimmy anymore. Amazon sending them checks. It's a wrap.
Well, I never trusted you. You still owe me that money. You told me that you needed that money to get out of jail. I lent you that money. What happened?
And my record's clean. I'm good. They never catch me, bro. I will say this, and I love talking about this stuff with you, AP, because I us talking off camera and stuff. I know there's stuff that you're like, this isn't the highest of prose or anything, but I love this, and it's just a good romping time. And like, so I know that you enjoy things just to enjoy them. And but what I don't want to anyone to think about me is that I'm saying that we shouldn't criticize books, because I think you have every right to tear down a book if you find problems with it and you have an opinion on it. I think criticism is just as valid as praise. But I do feel like there are some people who feel I guess gatekeep's probably the word I'm looking for. That's probably what they perceive it as.
But there's a difference between saying something like, oh, this is bad writing. And you go, because if you look at book reviews for Gardens of the Moon on Goodreads, people go, this is it's just someone writing up a D&D campaign. It's really badly written. And I go, right, let me show you this video I have of the prologue. And I can point to all of the literary techniques that are being employed. And I can point to the consistency of their use. And I can point to the cleverness of how thematically it's tying in. And you're telling me that that is badly written. Because you don't mean it's badly written. You mean you didn't like it.
Yes.
And there's a huge, huge difference between something being badly written and something that we like or dislike. And so by all means, when you want to talk about preference, you go, I didn't enjoy this. No one can ever gainsay that, because in matters of taste and preference, the customer is always right. Not that the customer is always right. In matters of taste and preference, the customer is always right. There's a big difference between I didn't enjoy and this is bad. That's what a 5-year-old says when you try to feed them broccoli. And we are adults. We have evolved beyond me no like this bad.
You know, like
Like, we've evolved beyond that. We have a lexicon. So when people make judgments about writing, and you say this is badly written, that is a statement and judgment that requires evidence.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Saying I didn't enjoy it, that is a statement that does not require evidence, because that has to do with something that only you will know.
Yeah.
This book is badly paced. Okay, so you want to talk about pacing. Let's talk about pacing. Where is the evidence for this?
Pacing is hard too. Pacing is its own beast. Like,
but what do you mean it's badly paced?
Paced chapter wise,
and
book wise.
See, this is what I get into, and it's never to say that people cannot have an opinion about a book, and people shouldn't talk about a book, and they shouldn't talk about both the positive aspects of it or the negative aspects. But there is a difference between an evaluation of a text and talking about how you feel about a text. And there is value to both things, but they are not the same. And so you can talk about, I felt this book didn't engage me. And you go, right, yeah, perfectly fine. Because I wasn't engaged, the book felt really, really slow, and it kind of dragged on, and I never really got into it. And I'm going, yep, follow you so far, not a problem. And this book was Gardens of the Moon. Okay, sorry, it didn't work for you.
The old twist.
But I don't feel upset at that. But if someone said Gardens of the Moon is badly paced and the writing's terrible, show me your evidence.
Do you fluff up the shirt a little bit and go, all right, time to break out that knowledge? Yeah.
But, and again, it's not that someone can't say I didn't enjoy it, or it felt slow, or and talk about, with their knowledge, their experience, their lexicon, to try and describe those aspects. Everyone is entitled to their opinion on a book. But when it comes to evaluating a book and making declarative statements about a book and making these judgments about a book, there's a difference between how we feel and the evaluation, at least in my opinion. And I know other people have different ways of approaching it, which again is perfectly fine. We live in a world with a range of opinions.
Yeah.
And it's all part of a conversation about negotiating different ways to talk about things and finding value in the conversation and learning from each other, rather than saying my way is the only way of doing it.
I think people would probably tell me that my bar is too low, but I'm just excited that we can have these conversations about talking about books, because so many people are talking about books. Like, that is in itself a win, at least for me and my my low bar and my low standards, I guess. But I do want to take 1 second. Fantasy Fanatic said, just finished my bachelor's degree today. No better way to celebrate than an episode of Chatting Nuts. Fantasy Fanatic, congratulations. You've achieved something that I never did. So you are much smarter than I am, and proud of you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, good job. Good work.
Someone had asked a question earlier on about why the Malazan books are hard to find in print.
Yes.
And you go, that's entirely to do with publishers.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen, and honestly, folks, I see people all the time ask Erickson in AMAs or on streams, like, give us the hardcovers again. And he's just like, I can't. Like, it's not up to me, guys. It's not.
Also, like, do we honestly think that that authors have like a printing press and they're sitting running off copies and then binding them themselves?
I think it is a little shocking for the general person to find out how disconnected the process is, though. I know it was for me. Yeah. Like, I honestly thought that there was a lot more of like a communication back and forth, but it does not seem to be that way. I saw someone at Erickson's AMA was like, oh my gosh, I think it was the German covers are beautiful for Malazan. He was like, are they? I've never seen them.
Yeah. But that happens all the time. That no, obviously certain authors are much more involved in aspects of publishing, or they have their own publishing setup. Like, they have their own private press that they do special editions of things. Like, there are different ways of doing it. You have self-published authors as well. I
mean, that's one of the cooler things, self-pub. Now, it does cost a lot of money. And that's why Zach Argyle and Bookborn, they kind of opened up a way of helping people out, and giving out, I don't want to call it a scholarship or a grant, but that's kind of, I'm blanking on the name of it right now too, so I'm doing a terrible job of promoting it. But they actually are setting up a fund to award to people to help pay for like covers and stuff for self-pub, and I think that's really noble because I'll be honest, covers matter. They do.
Are you judging a book by its cover?
Yes. Except for Heroes Die by Matt, is it Matt Stover?
Matt Stover.
Yeah, so I haven't read it yet, but everyone says the book is just fantastic. It's made for me, blah, 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 blah. But that cover, oh my.
Jimmy, this is when everyone realizes that you're shallower than a 2D picture.
You couldn't tell from the Burberry glasses. The Armani suit. No, I don't have an Armani suit on. If you're just listening to this, I don't have an Armani suit on. No, I'm going to read it. But it is one of those things where, like, how much more could this have sold if it had a great cover? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe.
But also, when you say a great cover, what is a great cover?
No, come on. No. Come on.
Ola, the Wild Witch, she has a YouTube channel, and she's done a bunch of cover now because she's a graphic artist, I believe. And she's talked about the different aesthetics and the different things that they're doing on the covers and why sometimes we think that works other than that. But ultimately, again, some of us are going to look at it and go, well, Ola said that one was terrible, but that's the one I like. And again, a book can be entertaining to you and be terribly written, like be like on the sort of the metrics of it, a bad book, but it can be really important to you. A picture can be bland and horrible and really badly put together, but for some reason it speaks to you, and no one can take away that personal engagement with art. But we have this bizarre art as commodity, art as object that has a cultural value, and we're trying to negotiate these different spheres.
Yeah, and I can understand that some people, certain covers resonate with them. I don't think, unfortunately, that the Matt Stover one, like, are you telling me that are you saying this does it for you, AP? Is that what you're saying? The leather? I mean, let's zoom in here. Let's really take a look. All right, so this is clearly AP on the cover. This is clearly AP.
Well, this was back in my modeling days. No, there was some artistic license made because obviously I'm taller than that.
I don't know. It doesn't do it for me, but you know what? I will say this: there's like almost a pulpiness to it that I kind of like. It's so bad it's good. If you look back at some of the pulp covers, and then look at different, like even with Terry Pratchett books, you had those covers by Josh Kirby, and it was the almost like Rubenesque figures, but in was it Bosch? The very comedic and a complex composite, and they were usually aspects of different scenes from the novel. Which nowadays everyone will go, oh, that's a spoiler, and you go, you don't know it's a spoiler. You haven't read the book. You have no context for it. It's information that is meaningless to you. And then they changed them to, I think they made a whole lot of them like black covers with like a single figure on them or a symbol, because they were more grown up. And you think of the Harry Potter books, they had the normal edition that everyone was buying, and then they had the adult edition, and that didn't include racy scenes or a bit of steaminess in it. It was a less childish looking cover because they thought that adults would be embarrassed reading a child's book on a bus or in the train or wherever. And it turned out they were right. The adult covers sold really, really well because some adults were ashamed of enjoying children's literature and YA. And it's because we have this bizarre cultural notion. Oh, have you read Joyce? You must read Ulysses. For a while, you used to go to someone's house and there'd be a copy of Ulysses sitting on the coffee table. They never read it.
And the thing is, if you moved it slightly, you could see that the coffee table had actually been sun-stained and was lighter than where this book had been, because it had been there forever. But it was good to be seen to be reading Ulysses. It was good to be seen to be reading 18th century French poetry. And oh yes, and inside you have a comic book of the X-Men because you go, I prefer to read something else. But the
good.
cover was the thing that sold it. There was a great Jeanette had a fantastic discussion when he was talking about paratextual information. So how covers can give away aspects of the contents, and that actually sets expectation. And he was talking about a certain period in France where any book that had a yellow cover was a naughty book. It was one of those books that would get your channel demonetized and quite possibly struck off. And so if someone was sitting reading a book with a yellow cover, regardless of what that book was, the public perception was, oh, hello. And what are you reading? Because that's what people picked up from the fact it was in that.
Evie says, I'm offended, AP. 18th century French poetry is great.
It is, but it's the sort of thing that someone sits on a public bus going, I'm reading this. Whereas you should be at home under the covers with a light, hiding the fact that you're reading 18th century French poetry.
That is a very interesting thing you bring up, though, that there's like preconceived notions based on literally just a color of a cover. Like I know and I don't know why I know this. My wife was telling me about it, but there's and I don't ask me, folks, I don't know what it was, but some romance trilogy. And, it's a little steamy stuff, right? And the old covers were terrible. Like, I'm talking like, typical bro dude with a beard, tribal tattooed outside, 8-pack, riding down like V into his jeans kind of thing. And they started selling really well. And they noticed that it was selling outside of normal like romance readers. They totally redid the covers and they look very generic. They have like a plain color with like some stars in the back. And it's like, called like His Lost Time, or I don't know what the hell they're called. But something like that. And it's like, it's interesting that they decided that they wanted to go away from like what a romance cover generally looks like. And you see this happen in fantasy when they reprinted the Wheel of Time for the Amazon Prime stuff. They totally changed the covers, and a lot of people were mad. They're like, that's not representative of what this is. Like, you're losing the spirit of it.
But I lost my copies of the Wheel of Time one time moving, so I had to buy them all again. And the editions that I bought again were the black editions with the symbol on them. Because fantasy covers go through cycles. Where for a while, you had the square lantern-jawed hero with the big sword doing some sort of pose with a damsel. And then they were like, and now we're going into, we're going to have small figures and the epic scale. And you see that on one cover, and then within 5 years, suddenly it's everywhere. And then someone goes, oh, well, I'm going to do something different. Dark cover with a symbol on it. Next thing you know, that's the trend that develops. And then it's now everyone's doing this. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to have all my figures are going to be facing away from the camera and into the book. Then everyone does that. Everything goes through these cycles as something becomes established, becomes a norm, becomes boring. And so you need to do something different. So they experiment with a couple of different things. The one that takes off, they go, right, everyone copy that.
And it's also happening inside the books. It's in the stories. The stories themselves become, trends and what's hot and what's not. And some people are like, I mean, if you take a look at like what gets really popular, you'll see like different renditions of that throughout time, right? Like you could argue you wouldn't have Joe Abercrombie without George R.R. Martin, and you probably wouldn't have, I'm trying to think of a newer, well, what's the dude with the powder mage? What's Brian McClellan? You wouldn't have him without Brandon Sanderson. Like there's trends. So it extends even past the cover, which is.
And we have that. If you think the books that you read that you go, God, this makes me want to write. Sometimes that is the inspiration that sets us off. And Tolkien did that. Look at the number of authors that tried to follow Tolkien, that tried to do their own version of Tolkien. And it takes time to move away from copying into actually telling your own story using those devices. And in colonial theory, they talk about adopt, adapt, adapt, or adopt, adapt, adapt. But it's, you see the thing, so you copy it, you adopt it. That's the thing. This is the thing that we are now doing. Then you become kind of good at it, and you become almost better at it than the original. And
Mhm.
then you use that to go in a different direction.
Right.
And you start playing with it and breaking the rules and taking it in a different way.
Branching.
And that is that is a cycle that we have with inspiration. So
Here's a question for you. And when you said it, it kind of like lit a light bulb in my head. I know that, you edit, right? And I know you've told me that you world build in your head. What is a series when you read it or have read it that made you want to write?
I've read lots of series that have encouraged me not to write because I've read them and gone, I am never going to be able to match
That happens to me more than the inverse of that.
One of the things that I enjoy creating things in my head, but I don't have a burning desire to create them for other people. I don't have a burning desire to tell the story. That, I think, is an essential part of wanting to be a writer. Whereas I like the personal. I love reading because I'm reading these works and I'm creating these things in my head. And then that sets me off thinking about all these weird and wonderful things and then creating stuff. And you go, oh, that's fantastic. And then I pick up the next book and I read it. I don't have a desire to tell people the weirdness that pops up in my head. But I'll give you an example of extrapolation from a series that was extant. So David Eddings wrote the Belgariad and then followed it up with the Malloreon quintet, so 5-book series. And the Malloreon is essentially, spoiler alert, if you've read the Belgariad, you've essentially read the follow-up. But when I was a kid, when I was much younger, I devoured these books. My mum had actually purchased them for me because we were going on holiday, and she bought these books so I would have something to read. Because it was going to involve long car journeys and that sort of thing. I had them read before we went on holiday, and she was so annoyed.
You better reread.
But I loved these books when I was much, much younger. And I studied them when I was doing my PhD. But that book ends. And what I did was I looked at the ending of the book and I thought about all of the things that had developed. And I went, if you were going to write a sequel to the Malloreon and you were going to write it for an older audience and you want to make it darker, the natural trajectory suggested by the things in the book would actually do this. And I worked out that the person that thought they were the hero would become the very thing that the very first book had all been about fighting against, that they would become that, but absolutely convinced that they were right, that these terrible things would happen. And they would rationalize why they needed to stop these other people who were trying to stop them, because it was the right thing to do. And they knew better than the other people. And suddenly I was creating an entire outline for this sequel. I knew who the heroes were going to be. I knew who the villains were going to be. I could see how the different threads would wheel together. And it was going to end in a tragedy. And I went, oh, fantastic. Right, moving on. And that was it. Once I'd done it,
it's the endorphin rush. It's you get it out and then you're done. Yeah. Some people get obsessed. It stays in their mind and they got to put it down, and that is like the rush, right? I understand what you're saying. I definitely get it.
So there are very few books that have inspired me to write. Meeting authors is the closest I've ever gotten to being inspired to write, because I want to be cool like them. And one of the assumptions is you need the ability. And I think ability is a big part of it, but you also need the dedication and to put in the hard work.
That's right.
And the dedication and hard work bit is the bit that puts me off ever wanting to be a writer, because deep down inside, I'm lazy and I don't want to make more work for myself.
Yeah.
And there aren't shortcuts in writing. Well, there aren't shortcuts to get good at writing.
Yes,
Um,
I would agree with that. In like anything, you know, it takes some dedication and consistency to do these things. And for me personally, like right now, I just don't have the bandwidth. Like I would have to cut something else out, and I'm just not willing to do that right now. I still have the urge to write. It's more so like, what do I cut right now? So I'm hoping that my body breaks down soon, and then I won't have to spend so much time exercising because I can't. And then I'll be like, oh, great.
but when you're exercising, you can be listening to an audiobook.
I
So
do
that's
do that sometimes.
you're already doubling up.
I do that sometimes. That's the only way I can read as many books as I do, is that I have to lean on audio at times. Lately the books I'm reading do not lend well to audio. Like Curse of the Mist doesn't have an audiobook. And then R. Scott Baker, the audio is actually really good, but man, is it dense. Like there's just some things that you have to pick up on. And um, the way that he does certain things with his punctuation, where he uses exclamation points and stuff, actually matters a lot. So I enjoy reading his written word. And I know some people think that's a weird thing to say, but I get a lot from reading his stuff physically for whatever reason.
And I'm not like listening to an audiobook or reading a physical book. They're not the same thing. They're both ways of consuming the narrative. But with an audiobook, you have this wonderful performance by the narrator. You have someone who is performing the book for you. And how they do that can actually alter your interpretation of the text. Whereas when you read, be it braille or with your eyes, it's you, the reader, and the text. There is no intermediary. There is no someone translating it for you. There is no someone giving emphasis to certain words. It's just you and the text. So they're slightly different things, both equally valid, both have pros and cons. And some texts seem to work better as one thing rather than another. And also, depending on the person, one can work better than the other. So the best thing about this is we live in an age where we have these choices, where we have the choice of, oh, look, there's a whole load of these books on audio. Fantastic. It makes books more accessible. But some books, just for whatever way they are written or whichever the audio narrator is, don't work as well for us in audio. And you go, well, okay. And other books, perhaps the style or what the author is doing on the page, sometimes it is necessary for us to physically read that as opposed to hear someone perform it. And doesn't matter how good the performance is, performances can alter our interpretation.
Oh, yeah.
So they are both wonderful ways of consuming narrative. They're just slightly different. They are equally valid and they're different.
That's the important part. They're equally valid. Yeah.
I listened. I was telling people at ICFA that I was listening to that series.
Expeditor. What is it?
Expeditionary Force by Craig Allinson. And it's narrated by R.C. Bray. And I really enjoyed the audiobook. It was fantastic. I loved listening to it. But I didn't enjoy reading the physical thing because of how it was written. It naturally fell into something that was performed really well, but the style in which it was written did not appeal to me. And I went, I would hate it. So why, if I'm going to hate something reading it, why not love it listening to it? You go,
it's because we want to enjoy what we're taking time to consume. So do it your way. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I love narrative. I love stories. I love how stories are put together. And I'm happy with that. And I know some people can get really snobby about these things. And you go, just because something is a different way of doing it doesn't make it less valid. But there are strengths and weaknesses to both approaches. Sure. And I have no problem, listening to an audiobook or reading a physical text and saying, yeah, they're different things, but they're both equally valid, but they emphasize different things.
Yeah, for sure. One thing Baker does, man, that I've picked up on, this dude uses all the punctuation. So like exclamation points, ... random paragraph, like hyphenation break. And like, it does add a lot to the story. It really does, especially with the way that R. Scott Baker does in this aspect, Emperor, especially his conversations and his dialogue, I think are so naturally flowing. Even how people will let off of a word, which can be very good in audio, by the way. I mean, like that's something you can actually hear, right? Where you have to kind of imagine it whenever you're reading it. It's very fascinating. one question I have for you, like, because we're talking about all these things, right? We're talking about things that, you can really dive into. We're talking about criticism, how you should look at these things, give things, different angles of looking at it. Is there an example you can think of someone, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but like someone that is an amazing storyteller, but maybe not the best writer? Like, are those two things, can they be independent?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I
agree.
And it's hard. I maybe have to think about this for a bit to try and come up with a good example. But there are certain I'm sure there are a bunch of books that a lot of them I enjoyed when I was younger because I was so enthralled in the story and I was invested in the story that it didn't matter that it was very pedestrian and some parts were overwritten and other parts were clunky, and because I just wanted the story and I really, really enjoyed it. But one of the easiest ways to illustrate this is Ireland has a reputation for storytelling. It is one of the things that we
you do love telling a story.
As a culture, storytelling is a popular thing in Ireland, and you can have wonderful oral storytelling where someone is going and they tell the story and there's an aside and then they do things and they extemporize, and it is an enthralling performance. Now, if someone had a transcript of that and gave it to you, you'd look at it and go, what is going on? So if you have the opportunity, there are obviously a type of comedian, and what the comedian does is they tell a humorous story.
Mm-hmm.
And there are YouTube videos now of a lot of their performances. Watch one of those things, but sometimes you have the option to get the transcript of what they say. Take that transcript and try and read it, and is it as funny as their delivery? And you go, it isn't, because it lacks their dramatic pause. They know exactly how long to hold the silence before giving you the next word. They know how to change the tone of something. They know when to shout and then when to say something very, very quietly. They are master performers of narrative. And that is an extraordinary skill set. And that's why when people do book reviews and they've listened to the audiobook, I sometimes get a little disappointed that they don't mention that it was audio and they don't mention the narrator and what the narrator did for the narrative. Because if you've listened to an audiobook, so much of that, I think, is you have to acknowledge the narrator because they're the one performing it. It's not just the text that you're talking about then. You're talking about this performance. It's a bit like watching a play and going, oh yes, I went to see Shakespeare's Hamlet. Shakespeare was an excellent author. I particularly enjoyed Act 2, Scene 1. Who was in it? That doesn't matter. It was written by Shakespeare. You saw a performance. Tell me about the performance.
Well, even stepping back from this audio versus physical here, I even more so just even writing, right? Like when you read a book and you go, this wasn't very technical in any way, shape, or form. The grammar wasn't great, but like, what a story. You know what I mean? Like that can exist, right? Like I feel like that exists.
And even then, we have modernist writers and postmodernist writers. We have people who do stream of consciousness stuff. We have people who celebrate the actual structure of language in it, and suddenly there's a lyricism, and you almost like it's almost like your eye is drawn along because they know the exact rhythm that they need for these words. That there are wonderful things like that authors can do, and then there are other authors who rely much more on the this is going to sound crude and negative, and I don't mean it that way. My brain is temporarily frozen on what I actually mean. But rely on the sort of the blunter instruments of, I've created a cool character and I'm going to spend time with this cool character and you're going to love them and they're going to do cool things, and they draw you in that way. It's a different way of getting reader engagement, but it's not through the language so much. It's through the creation of these concepts that we're then imagining. And quite often, a lot of late children's fiction, tween, early YA to YA, and even some adult books rely heavily on adolescent wish fulfillment. And it sounds like a very negative thing, but it's this thing of when you feel powerless, when you feel that the world is too much and you're trying to escape into this book, and there's a character that gains these powers and they're fighting the good fight and they take down the evil tyrant and they succeed against all odds, and then and they fight back. It is an entire trajectory going from being weak and fighting your way up to the top and succeeding. And that wish fulfillment, that power fantasy, can be extraordinarily heady and engage us, even when the writing is not particularly sophisticated or engaging or technically good. That the power of that story is in the story itself, because it's keying into an aspect and a need in our psyche and our psychology. And that can be very attractive. Think of the number of coming of age stories.
Oh yeah.
That, particularly when we were younger, like, could you have torn that coming of age story away from our greasy little mitts? No, because we were going, I want to be that. I want to be in that world. I want to be that character. Or even if you didn't want to be that character, you wanted to feel that power because you felt powerless.
Yeah.
And that is such a heady and intoxicating thing. And it's wonderful. It's a brilliant technique that authors employ. And it does sound pejorative when you call it an adolescent wish fulfillment or adolescent power fantasy. But it is about that feeling in adolescence where you can't control everything and you want control. That's what it's trying to get at, rather than, oh, this is just juvenile. That's just childish. That's not what I mean by it. And that's why I've been trying to explain it.
No, I think whenever you break it down like that and you actually like have time to explain it, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. That's why that is why that this is good. And like even the videos that you do and the long form content, actually being able to state your intent past the mission statement or the first statement you're going to make, and actually go down through into the low level details, you can really figure out that that's not a bad thing. But we have preconceived notions that these things are bad. Like Deus Ex Machina, everyone says it's negative, and it's not. It doesn't have to be. You can not like them, but it doesn't mean it's inherently bad.
Someone's just commented, this isn't a chat, this is a lecture. I'm so sorry. It's not meant to be a lecture.
And take notes, test Tuesday, folks. All right.
But you're exactly right. Like Deus Ex Machina gets a bad rap because I think, for a start, Deus Ex Machina sometimes gets confused with narrative convenience and gets confused with narrative contrivance, which gets confused with the fact that all narrative is contrived. There's actually, you could probably do like a whole video sort of breaking these things apart. The basic premise is all fiction is contrived. It is made up and it is a simplified form. So there will be things that, you would go, oh, look, he turned out that poor orphan. And then, oh, look, it turned out that person whose house that he broke into was actually his long lost uncle and he's going to be adopted, and everything worked out in the end. You go, well, isn't that lucky? How did that happen? It's staggering coincidence, that one. But we accept it in narrative because we have a threshold in narrative for what in real life we would consider staggering coincidences. So as much as we talk about realism, as much as we talk about that, we love realism in fiction, quite often we're not fully telling the truth because we like the fact that, oh, look, this one hero that arose over here, they were walking down the street and then they met the other hero. What are the odds of that thing happening? You go, if they didn't meet, then the story wouldn't happen. So it's all about getting a threshold of narrative, of contrivance, of coincidence within the text that the reader has a willing suspension of disbelief about, that they are willing to accept a certain level of artificiality to the construct because it is a story. Because if it was fully realistic, think of if the Lord of the Rings was fully realistic.
Everyone dies of dysentery.
Well, if the Lord of the Rings was fully realistic, Frodo gets the ring, and then we would have, what was it, 30, 35 years of him being in Hobbiton, in the Shire, just sitting there.
I mean, I'd read it.
And you go, right? And then they go out, and the hobbits are walking barefoot in snow at the top of a mountain, and not a single one of them gets frostbite.
Seems sus.
You start adding up the contrivances in this, but to get all the way to Deus Ex Machina, then. So obviously, if you're telling a story, particularly think of where it comes from a lot of the Greek tales. The Romans very much poo-pooed Deus Ex Machina, which is where I think we get our modern sneering at it. But when you have the gods meddling in the affairs of mortals, and the mortals going through all of these things, and then at the end, the god being sort of trundled down on some sort of mechanism, a machine, if you will, a god in a machine being descending down to resolve the issue because that was a true believer who had sacrificed all these things. And so the god is stepping in to sort things out. And you go, that makes perfect sense in a story that has the gods as real, meddling in the lives of mortals. When we think of the battle at Troy in the Iliad, the gods are on the field meddling in the battles. The gods are fighting one another and using other people as pawns. And yet we don't go with that. Oh, well, that's just silly.
That's ridiculous.
Well, why would that they just brought that author brought that god in because that person has plot armor. But that's not the point of the story.
Yes.
There are different things. And with Deus Ex Machina, it's become a sort of catch-all for an unexplained event that neatly resolves something.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, so let's take that as a concept. If I can point to foreshadowing and evidence within the text, you go, oh, well, I didn't spot that. And you go, okay, so you didn't spot it, but it means it's not a Deus Ex Machina. It was explained. You just didn't get it. Well, no, it's still a Deus Ex Machina because the author should have made it clearer. You go, the author can't imagine every single author or every single reader. They put foreshadowing in. If you picked up on it or you didn't pick up on it, that's entirely on you. But how is that then changing whether it's a Deus Ex Machina or not? We also can look at it in terms of, okay, so the author threw this in as a mystery because this is part of a series and that mystery is actually going to get explained. And people go, well, it's a Deus Ex Machina, it's never explained. And you go, yet. The word you're missing from the end of that sentence is it's not explained yet. Why does everything have to be explained up front? Why must narrative always be seen in that chronology? Oh, it's much more satisfying that way. Well,
for you.
For you. And we universalize our preferences. We think that our preferences are ubiquitous, are the norm for everyone else, and everyone else appreciates narrative the same way that we do. And you go, this might be an example of where that particular book or that particular series or that particular author is not the author for you. And there's no problem in that.
Yeah.
And you can say, like, I didn't like how they resolved the ending because it felt unearned. And you go, absolutely fine.
Sure.
Like, no one has a problem with that. But going, this is Deus Ex Machina and it's bad. You're like, oh.
Yeah, I see it all the time. It's like they're getting bonus points for knowing what it is. And I'm like, yeah, but like, could you explain it a little bit more? Because that's not good enough for me. That's not enough to turn me off of a story, I should say. I heard through Leanna told me the story once. She said that Pierce Brown was doing like a meet and greet, the author of the Red Rising series, and someone was like, well, I have a question. In like book 1, like chapter 5, this guy did this thing and like didn't really make like a lot of sense. Like, why wouldn't he just do this? And Pierce Brown was like, because that's not interesting. It's like, that is the greatest thing I've ever heard.
And it's weird. We have no, and the thing is, I've been involved in a load of these discussions as well. I am not knocking these discussions, but let's say, for instance, the classic one about the Lord of the Rings. Why didn't they just get on the eagles? Because it would be a really boring. Oh, look, Frodo has the ring. I summoned Gwahir, the Wind Lord, and right, get on his back, drop it off, done.
So is that a plot hole?
You go, no, it's not a plot hole. It just is not part of the plot. The plot is the sequence of events as we encounter them. But why would the eagles do it? And you go, well, okay, let's run the thought experiment. What if they called the Eagles and the Eagles went, no, we're not getting involved in it?
Maybe they were all sold out. Maybe they were
Or
rented for the day.
the Eagles pick up Frodo, and the lure of the ring causes the eagle to eat Frodo and ingest the ring, and then we have an evil eagle Dark Lord.
I like gray eagles. This is good.
Or they get close to Mordor, and suddenly a whole bunch of the flying monsters come out of Minas Morgul and attack them and eat everyone. But people seem to think, Tolkien, gotcha. You should have done this thing. And you go, but that's not the story.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been all that compelling.
But we've become overly focused, I think, on very superficial elements and calling them plot holes. So, for instance, like Frodo wearing the mithril shirt. And in the Fellowship of the... Spoilers for the Fellowship of the Ring, although if anyone is watching your channel and has not either read the book or seen the films or the cartoons, I'm sorry.
And we're reading it in November, so you can catch up.
But Frodo's wearing the mithril shirt, and he gets stabbed in the film, because you see it. It gets stabbed in the film by the troll with this, basically a polearm, or big spear, boar spear. And he falls down, and they go, oh, Frodo's dead. And you can clearly see, like, Elijah Wood has the thing here. It's so fake. But then it come back and go, oh, mithril shirt. It protected him. And you go, well, it protected him from being pierced, but what about the concussive kinetic force that would have broken every single bone in his chest and turned him into a pulp? It's meal. It's not plate. So the concussive force wouldn't have come through. And you go, oh, there's a plot hole. And you go, congratulations, it's a plot hole. It shouldn't have worked that way. It's magic armor. Move on. Like, the scene is interesting. It's full of tropes. Yeah, see that music? It's full of chords.
Yeah. Oh God. I did have a question up here, and I really wanted to get to it. It's Writer of Things says, what are AP's thoughts on predominance of hard world building, and if he thinks there will be a swing to softer world building?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's a predominance of hard world building. I'm assuming you mean secondary worlds that are extensively developed as a setting and as a reusable setting. But you still have a lot of standalones where it's only in one little place. You still have series where it's incremental. Think of like even the Dresden Files, very well-known series. Chicago's still pretty much nebulous in it, because I still don't know if Jim Butcher has ever been to Chicago. I assume he's been to Chicago by now. He must have done a book signing there at some point.
He does have a really cool fact, and anyone from Chicago, please let me know. I asked a guy that was in my Discord about this, and he wasn't sure. But in the Dresden Files, he mentions a thing called like a flood door, and how doors, whenever houses were built in Chicago, they would put the front door on the second level because they knew it was going to sink. So they'd put the front door on the second level, it would sink, and then you have your front door. And he mentions that in Dresden. I'm like, is that a real thing in Chicago?
Chicago is an entire undercity.
Well, and I know that it like it's going to go down into the ground. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm already forgetting it. Sink. Thank you. But is that like, did they really put doors on the second floor? Because he didn't say it as a joke. Like, he said it very literally. Like, it was a reason to explain why Harry like didn't see the door or something. So if someone in Chicago could tell me that in the chat, I'd be thankful. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
But so if you think Chicago starts out very, very nebulous, because I don't think Butcher had ever actually been there, or maybe he'd been there briefly, but I don't think he lived there. He didn't know it very well. And then incrementally, different places get explored. But the world fairy is inconsistent and illogical because it's fairy. The Never Never is not meant to be logical. You have it in things like the Iron Druid series by Kevin Hearn. Again, the fairy tale mythological places they visit are not consistent because they're meant to be kind of nebulous and magical and not real in that sense of the physical reality that we come from that conforms to certain sort of physical laws. When you read Neil Gaiman's Stardust, the world beyond Wall, this fairy realm, is inconsistent and illogical because it's fairy. There are all of these different aspects, but even then, when you think of standalones or you think of fairy tales, or you think of any of these, or even a book that is it's secondary world and they're in a city, but they never leave the city. You go, that is very nebulous world building, because all you have is the setting. You don't need always to create a concrete secondary world. And even then, if an author decides to return to it, they can incrementally build on, which is what happens with a lot of series. The vast majority of these big sprawling secondary worlds are developed over time. They aren't developed as a world and then the authors go, right, now I've spent 15 years developing this. I'm using the Tolkien model. I'm going to devote 20 years to developing all of this stuff, and then I'm going to start writing. Most authors start writing and they're making stuff up as they go along because it's fiction. They're authors. They are very beautiful liars. That's what they do for a living. And so they make this stuff up. And then if they return to that setting, they build on what went before. And slowly it gains and accrues
scope,
momentum, and solidity as they build out further and further and further.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think some of the worlds that we think are like super detailed world building, it's the details that the author wants you to know and cares about. And I think whenever you use the term hard, you really open yourself up to criticisms about things that don't make a lot of sense. I think Spren in Stormlight Archive could probably be used as an example. I think there's some instances there that don't make a ton of sense. So it's interesting. Like, even that, is that really hard if it's not all thought out? Isn't that somewhat soft in some regard? You know what I mean?
But even then, it all depends on the book that it is in. It all depends on the story that's being told. Magic realism, an entire special genre of, Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli shares a lot of similarities to some aspects of magic realism. But things aren't explained, they're just accepted. But that's a style of narrative. And there's no problem with that. Because it's an entire tradition. A story about, the little girl woke up and the unicorn was in the back garden, so they go and chase the unicorn away. And it's revealed as mundane. Or even there was that awful, sorry, I shouldn't say that. There was a film I didn't enjoy that Will Smith was in.
After Earth?
Sorry?
After Earth?
Okay, there have been a couple of films that Will Smith has been in and I haven't enjoyed. The one that I'm thinking of, he's a cop who teams up with an orc.
Yeah. I can't remember what it's called, but I know exactly. Bright or something like that.
Bright, yeah. And he goes out and he's swatting the fairies that are floating around because they're magical pests. And like, if you scratch the surface of what you're told about that world, none of it makes any sense. It is absolutely illogical. But there's enough in it to give you plausible deniability about it being a thing that you maybe would watch. I'm sorry that it is. I didn't enjoy it, and that's not fair of me to say about it. They create the impression of a world, and they're using a lot of analogies and literalized metaphors. And because of that, if you thought of it as an extant reality, a lot of the rules would fall apart, the world doesn't make any sense, and it wouldn't function. But that's not what the story is focused on. They give you enough that it supports the narrative events, and it gives the narrative events their importance within that setting. And that is all that a narrative ever needs, that the setting is enough to support the narrative.
Yeah, and I guess it's really about what you want to focus on too, right? Some people want you to know all the details, but I think even in those books, like where they go into this like very, very low level detail, they end up using it in the plot. The good ones, you know what I mean? Like, it does serve the story more than just a backdrop.
Well, one of the things I love about world building, people have a tendency to separate world building out from the prose, from the style, from all of these other things. And you go, but world building, like all aspects of narrative, is actually interwoven into everything else. And there's a famous line, I think it's from Heinlein, where he predicted facial recognition scans on security doors. But he describes the door dilated. And that one, the door dilated, 3 words. And with those 3 words, you are in a different place. That has actually given you a sense of the world that this story is in. And it's how the door opened. It dilated. And that you go, ooh, wow, something different. The world building is actually part of the language. Erickson, Esselmont, and I, we were discussing this in terms of referring to distances. And if one of the characters in a fantasy novel, so let's say Belgareth in the Belgariad, says to Garion, oh, well, it's 6 clicks to the next settlement. And Garion clicks, oh, kilometers. You would read that and go, why in this fantasy book are they talking about kilometers? If we went, oh, it's 6 miles, we kind of accept that, but it's still, particularly for countries where we still use miles to measure things, you go, but you go 6 leagues. Oh, 6 leagues sounds fantasy. Time period, measuring time. Oh, I'll see you in 5 hours. You go, how many hours are in a day? I'll see you in 5 bells. I'll see you in a 1/6 of a candle. I'll say, suddenly using those little things create the fantasy world. They are part of the world building, and they're tiny little linguistic inserts that reflect that the world that you are reading is different. And that is all about proper selection of words. And that is part of the world building. Even though it's not about the races and the monsters and the magic. It's
getting more mileage out of your words. And it kind of goes into what I really was looking forward to talking about tonight, and that is prose. But as I have found out, here's the thing, AP. I'm always trying to get better because I want to be able to relay my thoughts about books to people so that they can make their own opinion of it and maybe see if it's something they want to check out. And it's something I take pretty seriously. Like, I'm always trying to get better. And I felt like lately I've been really noticing like things in writing and prose, and I've been mentioning it. And, I don't think what I'm saying is wrong per se, but I found out that when I say prose, what I really mean style. And so does everyone else in the world, because I watched your chat with Cam and Steve, and it just totally illuminated the fact that I really meant style. So even when I think I'm doing a good job, you still put me in my place as a junior. So I appreciate it.
But it's never about putting someone in their place. It honestly is not. I am perfectly honest when I say, like, one of the reasons that Erickson and I chat so frequently, we are nerds about this stuff. Like, if there was a fan club for writing like that, we're part of it. We love it. We enjoy it. We like talking about it. We like talking about the technical aspects. It's influenced how I read. And some of his insights and some of the stuff that I've studied, I like being able to share it with other people. It's never to say, oh, you're all wrong.
No, I know. Yeah, you've never done that. I just, that's my own insecurities. I'm just making a joke.
But it's, no, and I can completely understand. Like, I know you didn't mean anything by it, but I know people sometimes get upset because they think I'm telling it must be done this way. I always try to say this is one way of looking at it, because there are other ways. This is one way to understand this. This is we can approach it this way. And it's all about options and possibilities and different ways of doing things and different things to think about. And yeah, when we talk about prose, very often, for the vast majority of the time, what we mean is style. But language is usage. Language is about communication. And for the vast majority of us, if I say, "Oh, what did you think of what did you think of so and so's prose in this? Is their prose good? Did you like their prose?" And you'd know, "Oh, I'll talk about this thing." And yeah, we're going to end up discussing style. But that's the discussion that you knew that we were going to have, and it doesn't matter that we called it prose. The thing that bothers me is Erickson's prose are. You go, no, it's Erickson's prose is.
Now I'm right. I'm doing that right, at least.
That, and you know what? That is a private pet peeve of mine. Well, not private anymore. It's now a public pet peeve.
135 people now.
And it's their prose is this, not their prose are. And it's anytime I hear that, I wince. And I know I shouldn't, because language evolves and things change. I'm still upset about literally now meaning figurative. I will never get over that, and I will die on that hill. But I appreciate that language changes and acquires meaning over time. I still am entrenched in certain respects, and I apologize. I'm old.
It happens.
But talking about style, and it's, I think one of the illustrations of it is you could talk about someone having a very transparent style, but using complex language. So the style can be transparent, but the language can still be complex, or they can use a simplified language and a transparent style. And you go, oh, so transparent doesn't mean simplified language. You go, no, it's two different aspects. And that's, I think, something that we sometimes overlook, that we use a term like transparent and we think we are being clear about what we mean.
Yeah.
But sometimes our meaning gets lost because people are not understanding what we mean by it. So it's sharing that context.
Yeah, and also knowing like that there is a difference between prose and style and voice and language. Narrative stance is something that Steven Erikson said that really resonated with me. I really like that. And he was also talking about genre expectations when it comes to style in prose, I guess, if we want to say as a more general term. I also liked, I think it was Cam, he said something along the lines of like, well, like fiction and prose are like one and one, because like prose is what you do in fiction, like that is the writing itself.
Yeah, and it's and again, pet peeve, people do not have to change their behavior because of this, but people who say, oh, the prose doesn't matter, how do you think the story is being communicated to you if the prose doesn't matter? The prose does matter. It may matter less to you than it does to me, but it still matters, because if it was written and it was, he went to the door, he opened the door, he went through into the corridor, he drew his sword, he attacked the man, he hit the man with his, you'd be going, oh my God. But the story's good. He went through the door and attacked someone with a sword. That's the story.
That's what I wanted.
You go, but I'm going to gouge out my eyes. It's how a story is told will always have a level of importance. Now, that importance can vary. It's not always the most important thing. But to say the prose doesn't matter, or I don't care about prose, then you don't care about writing, you don't care about reading, and you don't care about storytelling.
Yeah.
Because the prose is literally how it is being communicated to you. So it must be important.
Yes, and people who say, like for instance, like I know a few people who really enjoy Sanderson, the way Sanderson tells his stories, the window pane type of deal, right? And they say, well, I don't care about prose. And it's like, no, you do. You actually have a preference for that prose. Like that is still prose. That is still the way something's being written in the approach. Also, shout out
man carrying thing. Sorry, man carrying thing. The prose is prose.
Man carrying thing recently graduated, so shouts out to him. And also obviously his channel is massive. He's one of my first guests on Chatting with Nuts back in the day, so shouts out to Jake, and I'm really happy for him. And him and his wife have a channel now, and they talk about movies and TV shows, and it's excellent as well. It's woman carrying thing, which is excellent and consistent, and I would say that's a style
and on brand.
It's on brand, that's right. But yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about prose and style and try to understand a little bit more, because one thing that I've been noticing is that I have a really good appreciation for people who have like consistent style that kind of rolls with the tone of the book. And I talked about this in my Kings of Wild review with Nicholas Ames. It's not the best book I've ever read by any means. I don't think his writing like made me think about my life in a different way, but he described everything in a way that kind of fit the story and the feel of the story. So he talks about how the town kind of smelled like a headbutt of urine. Like you got headbutted by, and I was just like, that's so interesting. And he talks about it like the aroma punching you in the face. And this is like a very grim, burly type story. And I'm like, that counts for something. And I think a lot of times when style is mentioned or prose, we think that, the more poetic it might be or the more descriptive it is, the better it is. But I don't necessarily think that those two things go hand in hand, because I just read the two first books of Ursi by Ursula Le Guin, and she is phenomenal, and she does not use overly descriptive things. She actually does a lot of world building with subtle phrases like you mentioned, and that's why her book is 300 pages and has an entire world built around it. That's amazing, even from book one. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that and kind of the differences between style and what makes it click.
Well, and one of the things that Hemingway talked about was he was the one who came up with the iceberg method of storytelling. That's you can blame that on Hemingway, and it was anything that a reader can infer, you don't need to include. You can cut that out of your story. So what he's talking about is you only describe the absolute bare minimum to that, and that's the obvious bit of the iceberg that's above the water, because the reader is going to imagine all the rest of the iceberg underneath the water. So if you have, and this is obviously the trick then, is giving enough of the outline above the water that the reader can do that. If you don't give them enough, then it doesn't work. If you give them too much, then it's going to cause it to be flabby prose.
Flabby prose.
But that's what Hemingway developed that as his style. That became very, very popular, particularly in America, as the literary style to try and mimic. And I think in some respects, Cormac McCarthy took that and developed it in his own way.
Yeah.
Like he's not doing Hemingway. Cormac McCarthy is doing Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
But you can see that tradition of writing, of being in absolute command of the details on the page. And from those details, the reader being able to infer everything else. And then you have someone like Faulkner. And Faulkner, one of the hallmarks of at least some of Faulkner's writing, first of all, a lot of varying sentence length. And then suddenly you have these long, languid sentences. And it slows you down as you suddenly get clause after clause in this sentence. And it just rolls and it's slow. And there's a sensuousness to it because the diction, the rhythm within the sentence is working. And it's this long, slow, and it's almost the antithesis of what Hemingway was doing with these very clipped sections, these very stark,
blunt.
And this is much more rolling and sensuous. And you go, so is Faulkner a bad author? You go, of course not. Faulkner was a fantastic author. Those are just two technical aspects about their particular styles. Then you could start talking about the type of language that they use, the register that they're using. But when we talk about these things, sometimes we find styles that we really like, and we go, this is a good style.
Yeah.
This is good prose. And if you took that style, that approach to writing, and changed the narrative to something else, you would suddenly go, this is awful. This is overwritten. Because it all depends on the story that you're telling. And I'd given you this example earlier. If you imagine a shoemaker, and the shoemaker's shop is plagued with mice. So the shoemaker, gets the various traps to try and trap the mice. And you can imagine that being told as a children's fairy story. And that would use a certain register, a certain approach, a certain style. Because you're imagining, how would I tell this to a child at bedtime? How would I entertain a child with this story? So you're going to use perhaps simpler language. You're going to use language that they are familiar with their register, their level of literacy, their level of understanding of language. You're going to use the techniques that will make sense to them. You're going to be clearer in explaining how things happen, because they may not be able to infer quite so much below the surface the way that Hemingway talked about. Their ability to do that has not quite been honed in that way just yet, or so you may assume. Some children, of course, are geniuses. I was not. But so you would write that story with a certain level of literacy in mind, a certain lexical register. You would use your sentence structure as a way to create perhaps simpler sentences that are going to hold their attention, because we're assuming that this child is going to have a short attention span and be fidgeting and not wanting to be in bed. We are going to use what we think of as appropriate language to describe setting out the mouse traps. We might try and make it funny. And then, are we going to make it a funny fairy tale children's story? Or are we going to make it a scary fairy tale story? Because suddenly then, how you describe the mice is going to change. If you're going to make it funny, you might describe them one way. If you're going to make them scary, you're describing the same thing, but you're going to use different words.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it's in the same style and the same register for a 5-year-old child, that is written as a fairy tale, if it's a funny fairy tale, you're going to alter it in one direction. If it's a scary fairy tale, you'll do it the other way. And then if we think, well, what if I wrote this as an epic fantasy? That, and you sort of go, it's going to be ironic because clearly this is not an epic battle. But to this shoemaker, they are going to think of it as an epic battle. So they are building it up in their mind. So I'm going to use their perspective, and they're going to think in these grandiose terms. So you have a sense of irony has already crept into the voice, that you are now going to start using the language of epic fantasy to relay this story. And suddenly, those three variants are going to be radically different stories. They're different narratives. And it all depends on how you approach telling them.
Yeah, and that shows that language matters a whole hell of a lot, and also knowing like who you want to write for.
Yeah, and knowing your audience. Like, if you were writing an email to the boss of your company and you still wanted to be able to go into work the next day, you tend to frame your email in a certain way. If you're writing an email to your friend who's borrowed a book and hasn't returned it yet, you might choose a different way to write that email. If you were writing to, say, someone who was one of your Patreons who was donating and you wanted to, you might choose a different way of relaying information. That you're thinking of your audience every time when you write.
Yeah.
We do it all the time. We just don't think about it that way, but that is consideration of your audience. And you go, oh, well, I'd always be true to myself. If I met the Queen, I'd just go, right, Madge, how are you? Really? Like, that is how you would act. If you were being formally introduced to the Queen at a function, you would honestly do that.
Yeah.
And when we're honest with ourselves, we realize, depending on the audience, we change our language, and it's very profound in certain situations where, you know, people code switch depending on, you know, it might be a cultural thing or a gender thing or a sexuality thing, that there are different situations and they actually code switch. They change demeanor and language and even accent. And I used to do that at university because I was in England and my accent was so strong when I first went to university, people couldn't understand me. And so when I went back, I had a very English accent because I had to change and almost mimic how everyone else was speaking so that they could understand me. And then when I came home, people made fun of me because I suddenly sounded very English.
That's one thing that bothers me in books, actually, especially fantasy with tons of different regions and everything else, or different, like a caste system, that everybody just kind of talks the same. Like that can bother me in a book quite a bit.
But and again, there are different things that will trigger our suspension of disbelief or break our suspension of disbelief. And it will depend a lot on what we know about what we've experienced and how we perceive the world. You know, we might have had an impression that world leaders would speak a certain way. And then we've seen some world leaders who did not speak that way.
Right.
And you go, oh, well, I never thought I would hear a world leader say those things. And you go, but it now changes our perception about what leaders sound like.
Yeah, and also in a book, right? That can be a very powerful tool. And just like style, you might have this really elegant flowing style that has a ton of stuff underneath that water, but then all of a sudden you have a very blunt, sharp sentence to drive home a simple point. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then it like punches you in the chest. And actually, I think Joe Abercrombie does that quite well. I think that he knows when to be pointed. Robin Hobb also, and it's something that I love. I actually love whenever something's just like if it's a big impactful moment, it's just a statement, like a tell.
But and this will start like messing with it even further. So we talked about like matching the tone to the audience. Now, how do you alter it if you've changed style of narration? Because if you think that the most extreme example of limited third is a camera that records sight and sound of what's going on and no interiority. The most extreme form of it is just sight and sound. Then you have, as you move toward omniscience, you have, again, limited third, but you can now, where the camera is on that person's shoulder, you can dip into their head. We get some of their thoughts. We have their interiority. And as you move closer to omniscience again, you can again have a form of limited third where you can then switch the camera in the same scene to another person and get into their head. And then you can go to omniscient, who can dip into every character's head during the scene. And then you can go to full-blown third-person omniscient, where not only does the narrator know everything about what every character is thinking, they also know how the story is going to end.
Yes.
And so when you have one of those things to say, AP, Jimmy, and Philip were sitting at a table in Florida, and they had just ordered lunch. And Philip said, "Oh, I'm just going off to the bathroom," and he left the table. Little did AP and Jimmy know that was the last they would ever see of Philip. And you go, right, that's an omniscient narrator has just dropped in knowledge about the far future. Because how can someone in that moment know that they will never see Philip again? No one in that scene can have that knowledge. That's an omniscient narrator dropping in an insert. And so if you think if you set up a frame narrative, so if it's a found text, so this book has been written by someone and we don't know who wrote it. Nathaniel Hawthorne does this with The Scarlet Letter. Oh, I found this book in the attic, so I have plausible deniability about criticizing the Puritans. And I've presented it to you as best I can. But you go, he's theoretically found this book, and he could have gone through it and made a couple of changes because he's read the book, he knows what happens in it, and so he can make changes. So by having a narrator outside the text at a different level, you can suddenly start manipulating it. Or you can have a narratorial insert where you just go, no, it's an omniscient narrator, or it's a third person narrator, but the reader wanted this information, I'll just drop it in anyway. and while that might be a violation of the rules, a lot of readers appreciate that because they want the direct telling of something. Not every reader wants the whole show aspect. Not every reader wants to work at it. And again, not every book is going to be all show or all tell. It's always a combination. But usually when you set up the rules of your narrative perspective, you obey the rules that you set up. And if someone can predict far future events before anyone can actually have knowledge of them, that is a signifier that there's an omniscient narrator. If a character suddenly thinks something that is totally out of character. So, oh, look, there's my daughter-in-law. My daughter-in-law is married to my son. This is my son's name. And it gives you all this information. You go, that's an info dump that's been added in by a narrator.
Yes.
And it doesn't fit with the character perspective because the character is never going to think that way.
Yes.
And you go, okay, so that is breaking the rules of the third person limited perspective.
Sanderson does this.
And the thing is, a lot of Sanderson readers like that. And you go, okay, fine. But you don't defend it on the grounds of this is good. You go, this is breaking that rule.
It's a decision.
It's a decision that he has made because his readers like it. And you go, fine. But it's breaking a rule of writing specifically for that. Recognize that and don't try and explain it, because the only way to explain it within sort of the construct would be to say there's an omniscient narrator. And it's not set up as an omniscient narrator because it's focalized third person limited.
Like Philip's example, he says, while Philip was in the bathroom, AP and Jimmy plotted against him, but little did they know that Philip anticipated their plot and teleported to his warren. I'd love to bring up some examples if you're cool with that. And this kind of goes just into the style and prose.
But before we do, I hate that you brought up Sanders. People already think that I hate Sanders.
I was actually don't. This is my new segment on Chatting with Nuts when AP's on. It's called Positivity with a Critical Dragon. AP, I want you to say one positive thing about Brandon Sanderson.
Well, apart from the fact that he's a very successful author.
Yes.
And he writes a style of narrative that is widely and wildly accessible. And he has intricately constructed plots and he writes them in a way that his readers enjoy. You go, like, he does a lot of things, and he has created some really interesting characters and does brilliant fight scenes. There are aspects of Sanderson's writing that I like.
No, you did good. You don't have to give it any more claw. I can see where we're going. No, I actually do enjoy I enjoy Sanderson, and I know that you do not hate Sanderson as many people think. So I literally in my notes I said make AP compliment Sanderson.
But everyone has preferences. And to be perfectly honest, Brandon Sanderson's writing is not my preference. It is not something I enjoy about his writing. And, that's just my preference. But clearly a lot of people love it and it works for them. And you go, well, okay, fine. But there are aspects to his writing that I don't enjoy. And I think you could change without losing anything. All the information would be there and it could be worked in seamlessly, and you would lose nothing from the text. But people like me, who their eyes catch on it, would no longer catch on it. So actually that would make it more accessible. But, that's just my opinion on it. I like The Emperor's Soul.
Great book. Novella, whatever. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And this is the spy rabbit. Actually, I'll save it because if we get on this rabbit hole, we ain't coming back out. So I do kind of want to push back, or not push back, but dial back to talking about style and prose and kind of showing off maybe some examples, and you can kind of talk about the decisions that the author's making here and what it tells us about the story. I'll put this up on the screen here and I'll read it out loud for the people who are just listening. But this is the opening sentence to chapter 1 of A Game of Thrones. And it says, "The morning had dawned clear and cold with a Christmas that hinted at the end of summer."
Right. And so, well, let's talk about this. So this is a nice straightforward two clause. The morning had dawned clear and cold. So you have light, you have clarity, you have cold, but it's with a crispness that hinted at the end of summer. So it's not freezing, but it's that slight chill when you get up in the morning, but it's not muggy. There's a freshness to it. It's giving us a time period. And so it's the morning and dawn. So there's a bit of action to it. We know it's very early morning. And we also get this idea that it's coming to the end of summer. So it's still nice weather, but we're now getting into the autumnal season.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for someone who has read any of A Song of Ice and Fire, winter is coming means something. The seasons mean something.
Yes.
So while you read this sentence and you think you're just getting, it's early morning and you're getting a sense of the time period and we're going to move on, it's a nice opening to help a reader place where they are.
Mm-hmm.
When you get the information that summer and winter are not how we think of seasons, that it is different, this takes on additional resonance. And then when we think of it as an extended metaphor of summer being the good times and winter being the bad times, when we start thinking of that, that this is actually signaling the end of good and the start of something tumultuous and bad.
And it's a hint. It's just a hint.
So it's not spelling it out to the reader. It's not hitting the reader. And the castle was a cry because the king was being plotted against, and soon there would be war. You don't have to give everything to the reader up front.
Mm-hmm.
But because of this, it seems like it's just a simple description. And yet, as you get further and further into the story, you realize this subtext, this context to the description that is suddenly doing something else.
There's a lot accomplished in this sentence.
But even if you look at clear, cold, and crisp, the
Mm-hmm.
so the morning had dawned clear and cold with a crispness.
Mm.
And you can even hear the rhythm in how Martin wrote that.
Yeah, and even if you compare it to the word of summer, it's actually really interesting because it dawned clear, cold, and crisp. These are all very sharp sounds. And then summer, which is very rounded. It kind of bubbles out. Summer being, summer is appropriately named because you can feel that. There's a huge contrast, not just obviously with what we know from the weather, but in the way that it's pronounced. It's really excellent.
By the way, someone brought up there that the significance of an opening line is a bit overrated, in my opinion. I think the first paragraph should create the hook. Well, you don't necessarily need a hook in the first paragraph or the first line or the first two paragraphs or the prologue. That you can a hook is generally referring to a plot hook rather than the style of prose. What we're talking about here is not necessarily this is how a reader is hooked. It's taking very simple, easy to refer to lines that we can talk about what an author is doing without spoiling books that people haven't read.
Yeah, this is not. This isn't because it's an opening sentence. It's actually just because of it's a sentence. We just wanted to look at style. And George R. R. Martin is very. He always has some kind of really strong opening sentence and generally hides a ton of subtext in it. That's actually not something he just did at the beginning of Game of Thrones. He does it actually at the beginning of every chapter. You can get a lot of headway trying to make theories and predict things because he stuffs so much stuff into subtext. It has actually nothing to do with hooks or opening lines or like the best opening lines.
Like if you think in the Wheel of Time, where it has that refrain about the wind blowing and the wheel turning, I can't remember but it starts all of the Wheel of Time books. That's a repetition that is familiar, and it's the same as a long time ago in a land far, far away. It's creating the epic mythic feel of you're being told a story. Oh, Steve, you
I did take notes during Esselmont, you and Steve's talk about prose and stuff. I mean, I just thought it was your best video. I thought it was incredible.
See, this is where Steve goes, oh, you said that, AP, you were wrong.
You're gonna get a phone call.
Gonna get a snotty email is what I'm gonna get.
Steve, I hope you're well, my friend.
Steve, it's like 1:20 in the morning. I'm doing my best.
You're doing great. So let's take a look at the first sentence in chapter 1 of Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. The first thing the boy Garyon remembered was the kitchen at Faldor's farm.
Like, so obviously this is doing something completely different, or is it? Because we have character mentioned, the boy Garyon remembered. So we get the first thing the boy Garyon remembered. So we're getting his perspective, his memory was the kitchen at Faldor's farm. So we get a location, and we get a hominess to the thing. So again, while the first example we looked at was about setting a time period, this is setting the scene as well, but this is setting it in terms of location and in terms of the feel. Because the first thing the boy Garyon remembered, you almost get a sense of familiarity is what is going on here. And because of that, it's what do you associate with farms? And we're probably going to go with wholesomeness and that hominess and the feeling of family, all of that sort of thing is tied into this. But again, it's about establishing a character in the opening line and a perspective in the opening line and where it is located. And all of that done just is very, very simple.
Yeah, and so the two things I notice about this sentence, and I'm not a pro at this, is I want to know why he left. Because he's remembering, so he has left, right? He has made some sort of I want to know why. And Faldor's farm is great alliteration. I just love alliteration. Big fan. I know Le Guin's also a big fan of it. She talks about in Poughkeepsie. Elfland Poughkeepsie essay that she did. Yeah, those are the two things I think of at once. And it's really impressive. Like whenever you take the time to consider what words you're really using, like how much you can get done. I don't know. Whenever I look at these things on this kind of low level, it really, it's kind of inspiring, to be honest.
And the thing is, this is, when authors are writing and they go, I'm writing this thing and I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And then you go back to it. And sometimes you go, that there's something about this sentence doesn't feel right. So like if you had changed that to the first thing the boy Garion remembered was the garden at Faldor's farm. If you change kitchen to garden, you're not getting that sense of warmth and that sense of food and home. You're getting outdoors. You've actually changed the sense of it. If you change Faldor to Gordon, the first thing the boy Garion remembered was the kitchen at Gordon's farm. You're getting a repetition now of Garion and Gordon, the good. So you're making a connection that way rather than Faldor's farm and making the alliteration that way. That just playing around with a couple of the different words in it, you can see how you're actually starting now, and these are starting to evoke. These are not evocations of atmosphere, but starting to build atmosphere into it, because the kitchen is that place of warmth and food and comfort. If it had been the barn at Faldor's farm, that doesn't have the same connotation.
Yeah, and why is it? Why? What's the second thing he remembers? That's probably also significant. Is Gary
Probably
on
what
a
he
chef?
left his keys.
That's right. And he got in his Corvette and he went away. And he went and started an action movie because Farm Boys and Fantasy's old. I hate tropes, AP. I hate tropes. I hate verses in songs. It's the worst. All right, let's take a look at the opening line of The Cold Equations by Tom Godwin.
No, I have something that I can share about this one. But
Okay.
let's talk about this for a second. So
well, I should read it.
He was not alone.
There it is.
Right. 4 words. Does this give away anything? Okay, speaker he. So male speaker, male focalization on this. He was not alone. So there's a presumption that he thought he was going to be alone. But what we don't know from just those 4 words is where the story is going. So I wanted to show you something, because we were just talking about this in terms of the Garion one. If I can get this.
He was not alone. It's a great hook sentence, though.
Yeah, but so he was not alone. It's a sort of hook. So can you see this?
Boom.
So there's the opening sentence. Now, if we have, he was not alone. He heard it move in the shadows. What is being evoked here? Because so he was not alone. He heard it move in the shadows.
So he probably can't see.
So it's dark. There's darkness because we have shadows being referenced, and he's hearing something rather than seeing it. So I'm. By the way, these are my poor. This is why I'm not a writer, but I'll try and explain this stuff. But this is about trying to evoke a sense of horror where he was not alone. He should have been, and it's a bad thing that he is not alone because we have it move, not he or she or they or anything like that. It. So we're creating a sense of a monster or a thing, and it's moving in shadows. It's not revealed. It's hidden. So, part of what you could do with that is this is maybe starting to build towards, say, a horror story based on this. But he was not alone. He felt the warm hand clasp his shoulder. Now, that second sentence has completely changed what he was not alone. He was not alone. That felt bad, but he felt the warm hand clasp his shoulder. This is now reassuring. This is now, he isn't alone. He doesn't have to face anything alone. We've completely changed the tone of what he was not alone meant. This is now a positive thing. He was not alone. Their voices rang out behind him. And in fact, we can probably contrast that with he was not alone. Their voices whispered behind him. Now, so you can see the similarity between those two sentences. And yet think of the difference in evocation of what you're feeling in terms of those two things. With my very poor, blunt examples, their voices rang out is much more positive. Their voices whispered is much more sinister.
Yeah, rang out almost makes you want to run. Whispered almost makes you want to shrink and hide for some reason.
He was not alone. His friends crowded around him. So we're getting, it's much more similar to that. He felt the warm hand clasp his shoulder.
We're drinking.
But so you can see that just in those, he was not alone is this question almost. What does this mean? What does being alone mean in this sense? And what we're going to find out with the rest of the next sentence and the what's going to follow in this story is going to be framed by that, and is going to frame that, is going to give us a sense of what alone is meant to mean in this sense. But you can see how having a second sentence, you can radically change what the word alone means, the connotations and feelings associated with it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a very brief, easy illustration.
Honestly, it's a good writing prompt. He was not alone. Now take it. You know what I mean? Like there's so much you can do from that pivot point. And it really opens up your imagination. And there are books when I read the way things are structured, it does open up your imagination. I actually think The Dark Tower does that quite well. And I'm throwing this one at you. This one is on the fly, just a wee bit. Okay. And this is the first line from Stephen King's The Gunslinger, Book 1 in The Dark Tower. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed.
And that is that's an excellent opening line. Like that, it's evocative. So the man in black, a mystery figure, fled across the desert. So he's running. What?
Steve says he was not alone. What kind of coffin was this? It was a 2-for-1. They had BOGO and
the one you're going to end up in, Stephen.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay, so the man in black, mysterious figure, fled, so running away, and gunslinger. So gunslinger, we immediately have an evocation of the Western. We have a style in our head of what we're assuming that is. All of those things are aspects that are immediately conjured up. So we have action, we have location, and we have two characters being introduced.
Solid. Yeah, and this is probably my favorite opening sentence of all time. And why the man in black, you can kind of figure, okay, so maybe he's evil, because at least in America we always associate someone wearing black garb, right?
Yeah, but the black hat versus the white hat from the old Westerns.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good, and it has that Western feel to it. Sets up the setting. We have the gun. Who's the gunslinger? Why is he following him?
And it's one of the strange things is none of these opening lines are necessarily going to be the thing that is drawing you in. It's usually, I tried to show with that example, that you can read a couple of lines very, very quickly. So an author has a paragraph very easily to try to catch your eye, to intrigue you with something. But what I thought was interesting about a lot of these is they are doing different things. And we see setting a scene, setting a physical scene, setting a time period, setting a mood, or evoking an atmosphere. That all of these different lines have illustrated different aspects of how authors use opening lines. And it's not always, look at me, read me now. Philip will tell you, the opening line or the opening word of Beowulf, what? And it's yelled with this exclamation of basically it's usually translated as something like hark, listen, pay attention to me. It's a command to the audience of give me your attention. And that is very much about, guys, stop drinking and talking. I'm about to tell you a story. Listen up. There are so many different ways to open a story because there are so many different stories that we tell. Narrative is not fixed. Narrative is going to change according to narrative perspective and the different events and the different characters and the different genres and the different styles and the different voice and on and on and on. That it's the whole range of things. But you can do different things with it. And Like those are very simple, straightforward sentences, and yet we could see just in a couple of words how different things were being done.
Yeah, and word choice, and you know, and the way it sounded. You know, we go back to oral storytelling. You know, speaking some of those sentences out loud, specifically the Game of Thrones one and the Eddings one, I felt were very powerful in the way that it kind of flowed, right, with the consonants, right, the crisp, clean, that kind of feel.
And again, you can evoke different things. Like Guy Gavriel Kay's Tigana has a beautiful opening line, and it establishes world building and the fantastical nature of the world in those first opening lines, and it's very lyrical and poetic, and that sets the style and tone and what you're approaching for the rest of the book. But it all depends.
Yeah. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of power when you're penning a story. You have all these decisions, and you can lay as much subtext as you want. It's empowering, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the beauty of narrative, because an author creates something, and obviously they're trying to communicate meaning and various meanings to a reader, but the reader is an unknown quantity in that equation for an author. They can use all the tricks that they know, all the different tools that they know to try to get their meaning across, but they're not necessarily going to be successful, and they certainly won't be successful for every single reader, because every reader is different. Then we as readers take this text and we don't know what the author is thinking. We just have the text and we're decoding this information, and we make it live and breathe and imagined in our minds. The meaning, the importance of various things within it, how we interpret things, the stuff we prioritize, the stuff we deprioritize within the text, the things we rationalize and excuse, the things that we go, nope, I'm going to pick up on that and I'm going to interrogate it. Those are all personal choices. And it's a deeply personal thing where you have two minds both connected and separated by this common item, this narrative. And in some circumstances, you will understand the authorial intent in something, but you will also misunderstand or interpret it a different way. And that is what is so fascinating about narrative. It is flexible. It's not infinitely flexible. It's not that every any narrative can mean everything. There are going to be a certain range of meanings and a range of established notions within the narrative. But it's flexible because it's not that it just means one thing.
Yeah.
And that ambiguity is can be very heady, can be very intoxicating.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's, you know, we kind of talked about rereading a little bit earlier, and like you come back to a sentence and it can mean something totally different to you in a different time in your life. And you could actually see beauty and simplicity at times, or maybe you start to resonate with some of the more lyrical stuff that you're reading, or whatever it might be. But it is that like independent experience. And I love how you said that, like you're connecting with someone over this narrative. That's a really powerful and special thing. Really is.
But it's a form of immortality for a number of authors. Like if you think reading Shakespeare's work, you're in communication with Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the, you know, you're going to ring him up and go, where's that $5 you borrowed? But but you're getting part of Shakespeare's mind, his thoughts communicated to you via this text across time and space.
Yeah.
And, you know, it is one of the weirdest and most wonderful things about stories, this immortality that goes with them.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, from a completely pride-driven aspect, like one of the reasons why I do want to write is so I could have something that kind of like lives past me, that maybe keeps a conversation going, or that it continues maybe an idea. Like one of the more powerful things I think that can happen whenever you read a book is like whenever you feel like a book's been written for you, and it maybe puts into words something that you never thought you could describe. And that is, in my opinion, that's the peak reading experience for me personally. And the fact that maybe possibly one day as a writer, someone can say, hey, so this might help someone understand what they're feeling. I thought Toll the Hounds was that in a lot of ways in talking about grief. I also felt like Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, especially later in the series. Um, there's things that like you process in life, and guilt and trauma and all these things. And this is why I love fiction, because sometimes it's a little easier to talk about these things. But specifically, those two examples, it gave me a new perspective, or kind of put into words what I was feeling about these things. And also seeing it from like a different perspective is interesting, like it happening to someone else, and then you relate to it. So like a really powerful and evocative thing that I cherish. And to think at all at one point, maybe writing something that could do that for someone else, I think is like, that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about.
And to be fair, I think a lot of authors dream of their work finding that reader that it speaks to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's similar to the impulse that I felt when teaching, that you always wanted to help a student, and you wanted to reach a student to get them to understand more, to open their mind to new possibilities. And I'm saying this in a totally metaphorical way and not literal way. You wanted to touch their lives,
Mm-hmm.
not them, because that is a no-no.
Jesus.
But you wanted to touch them in such a way that their lives were enriched by the experience, and you added to it, and that lesson would be with them, that
Mm-hmm.
new thing that would be with them the rest of their lives, and it would add to their experience, that achieving immortality in such a way of touching someone's life to make their life better, and that would carry on for the rest of their existence.
Yeah.
Because I remember at school, certain teachers, and some of us had like, you sort of go, oh, that teacher changed my life. That teacher understood me. That teacher showed me something. Again, metaphorically, not literally. But we all had one of those teachers that made us love the subject, or
Mm-hmm.
opened our minds to a new experience, and created a desire and interest in learning, or in reading, or in a particular subject. And I think I was extraordinarily privileged to have teachers like that in my life.
Yeah.
Who encouraged my curiosity about these things, and gave me that space and environment to read more, and to take the time to entertain my silly notions about the study of narrative.
Well, I don't know if you realize this, but you realize that you are that to many, many, many people, thousands of people online. That's you.
Thank you very much for saying that. It's very sweet.
Yeah, I think you have impacted a lot of people and changed the way that they spend. We spend our time reading because we love it, and for you to help people and enhance their experience and make them understand a little bit more of what they're reading and what they're consuming. I think you deserve many more thanks for what you do. I mean that. I really do.
Well, I remember the frustration I felt when I read a book and I couldn't put my finger on why I didn't like it, and I was struggling with the way to articulate, and I was trying to explain there's something about this, and sitting down with a teacher who went, it's that thing, you don't like that, and talking me through it, and you go, no, I have a word for it. Now,
Yeah.
when I see that, I can identify it, I can understand it, and I can articulate it to someone else. And for me, that was such a relief. Learning the language of these things was not the teacher telling me I must think things, but it was giving me the tools to articulate my thoughts, to refine my ability to think about these things, and to isolate. It wasn't that I didn't like first-person narratives, but I didn't like this aspect, and I was able to then start breaking it apart to isolate those elements in that particular narrative I didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
that is all I've ever tried to share with people.
I think it improves discourse about the thing that we love talking about and gives us more avenues to do so. So it's a service that we appreciate, man. There's tons of people in the chat, saying how much you affect them, and I know that they are not alone in that. One of the things I saw here in chat, and I know that this isn't really surprise to you because you happen to work on said piece of work. But we have Philip Chase's first line to his first book, and it is "Death like silence descended upon the temple."
And of course, I put a massive red pen through that and went, "This is terrible. This is awful. What are you doing? You don't know how to write."
I love this. Steve says, with AP, academia's loss is YouTube's gain. And I will take all the gains. Let's go. Let's go. I mean, you've made my reviews better, man. You really have.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad something that I have said has helped. But like, it's not me doing anything. It's everyone else. I'm not the one doing it. It's other people doing it. They're putting in the work and they're reading and thinking about things, and that's all it is.
Yeah, and I also think that you're a really, really good face for someone who is, has the educational back. You have the PhD in these things and the way that you talk. And Philip is also really great at this.
Whereas I have a face for radio, Philip has a face for YouTube.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he should be on the cover of these romance novels we keep talking about. But really, you guys make it more accessible, and that's super duper important, especially for people like all over the world from different backgrounds, coming from different circumstances. Like to have that information not behind some sort of paywall or something like that. Like I think it's important.
And that, I spent a long time studying narrative. I was very privileged to have that opportunity. It was an extraordinary privilege, and I was so lucky to have that opportunity. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity because we all have different pressures in our lives. We all have different commitments that we have to make. And what am I going to do? I'm just going to sit on my knowledge and never share it. I'm going to sit on my experience and never share it with other people.
Yeah.
And I just think, well, no, this is something that I'm passionate about. There might be other people out there who are passionate about it as well. And it's fun to share our experiences and our perspectives.
Yeah, it's also, it's weird because I feel like slightly validated, like after going to the conference, like you see all these brilliant people discussing the thing you love that a lot of people consider to be silly or a waste of time. And it kind of does give some validity to it. Whether or not like we should really want that or need it is another issue. But for me, it does feel a little bit validating.
And yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but certainly in my life, there have been a number of people who have said, "Why are you wasting your time reading that stuff? Why don't you read real literature?
Yeah.
Why don't you study a real subject? What's the point in looking?" I actually, someone I worked with, and they were an expert in Gothic literature, and they go, "And you just read that fantasy stuff?" And I'm going, I'm sorry, that you're an expert in Gothic literature. What did you think that was historically accurate?
What's high literature, AP?
And it's, understanding that the literature, we tend to think in these little boxes: fantasy, science fiction, horror, YA, Gothic. But literature isn't in boxes like that.
Mm-hmm.
We think about it that way because it makes it easier for us to conceptualize.
Yeah.
But really, literature is part of all of these different traditions of storytelling from all over the world that are borrowing from each other, stealing outright sometimes, influencing each other, inspiring each other. And there is bleed through in all of these different things. And because it is so vast, that's why we like putting the boxes in place, because it makes it easier for us to conceptualize it.
In the marketing department.
Well, and we do live in a capitalist world, and there is a commodification issue that we could discuss another time. But we sometimes forget that, okay, so someone was inspired by the Lord of the Rings. They were also inspired by a whole load of other things, because Robert Jordan didn't read the Lord of the Rings and only the Lord of the Rings and go, right, I'm now going to write the Wheel of Time. Mm-hmm. Because you read the Wheel of Time and you see elements of Arthurian myth in it.
Oh, for sure.
And you go, oh, that. And then you see elements of gender politics in it, and then you see elements of Dune, or sorry, Dune, as the other people pronounce it. Dune by Herbert. But you see elements of that in it, and Jordan took those elements. He took these different things that had inspired him and that he wanted to explore and write about, and started writing The Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
That it wasn't any one thing. It wasn't copying one thing. That science fiction, fantasy, myth, legend, folklore, fairy tale, modern day politics, latter day politics, the classics, TV writing.
I mean, George Martin is a huge Faulkner fan, and it's interesting because like I feel like influences from like these people, like when I hear that, or like whenever I hear about like Erickson talk about his influences, it makes me want to like go read those things. And so even their inspirations then widen and open up doors.
And yeah, I think, you had mentioned much earlier on in this conversation that, going into Barnes & Noble, I don't want to waste my time on bad books. And sometimes we feel this pressure of we need to read the new thing, the latest thing. We need to, and we want to support authors. We want to give them our support. And we feel time poor and we don't have the time to dedicate to all this reading. But time spent reading where you've been engaged in a world or a story is time well spent.
I agree.
And as much as we have fear missing out on the next big thing, I reconciled myself to the fact when I started studying fantasy that I was never going to be able to read anything. I was never going to be able to read everything that was being published. The field is too big, and there were always going to be things that I was going to miss. So instead of worrying about missing out, I go, yeah, I am going to miss things. But that suddenly freed me up to go, well, I'll just read something else then. I'll read what I want. I will read these different things. I know I am going to miss important stuff. I may get round to it eventually, but I think it is important to read widely and read different things. But that's why I'm not always chasing the latest release or the new hotness or the new trend, because I'll get to it when I get to it, if I get to it.
Well, here's a question for you on the flip of this, and I've seen this happen a lot with like newer series, because like there is like a hype train, like the hype train leaves the station and here we are, right? It will not stop until the mechanic loses his life or something like that, or mechanic, conductor, whatever. Anyways, it feels like it's almost like taboo to pick a newer book as like your favorite book of all time, that's like lifted up to this status. Like I feel like a lot of readers pick things that have been around for decades and decades and decades that have like stood up over time. Why do you think it is that it's almost considered like to pick a newer book is like I think this is like the highest of the genre.
Well, if you read The Lord of the Rings when you were 11 and you read it again when you were 13 and you read it again when you were 17 and you read it again when you were 20, and then you pick up a new book and you go, oh, I'm going to read Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. How is any book going to live up to the legacy of the amount of time that you have spent in that world, that the hours that your imagination has played in that world, the familiarity that you have with it, the comfort that you have in it, and how it got you through all of those different experiences? It's interwoven into your life. On the other hand, how many times have you seen recency bias?
Oh, it's real.
So that's entirely the other thing. It's like, oh, well, I just read this book. This is the most amazing book I have ever read. 4 weeks later, I've just read this book. This is the most amazing book I have ever read.
Hey, are you calling me out, or I feel like it's
that would mean. Do you think I watch your reviews?
That's the best burn I've received on the channel. That was pretty good. I like that.
I'm sorry.
No, that was terrific. You might learn something.
and that's the thing. It's nostalgia, and what you were talking earlier about Aragon. For some people, they will read Aragon, and it's almost not seeing the words on the page.
But
It's
remembering the time you read it.
experiencing that feeling. And that book will be a sacred text because of that. And then you'll have someone like me come along and go, well, Aragon came out after I'd read a bunch of things and I sat down to read it and went, that is now a book that I have read. But my nephew, one of my nephews, loved it. That book for him was, in some respects, say like The Lord of the Rings was for
The
me,
Hobbit or something,
or Legend by David Gemmell, or Elric, Moorcock's Elric, or there are these texts in our past that blew our minds, and we went, I did not know it could be like this. And it doesn't matter that some crusty old guy like me comes up and goes, it's badly written.
Back in my day.
When the world was still in sepia. Unlike Erickson, the world was in black and white in Erickson's time. At least we'd moved on to sepia in my time. But we all have those books in our past that it is very difficult to take that step back from. And to actually look at the book, because it is so bound up in our experience. But at the same time, there are times when we go back to those books that are so beloved and we start reading them and we go, is this a different edition of this? Isn't what I remember.
Oh man.
And our brains are weird in the first place.
They sure are.
But and again, you have to, sometimes a book hits at the right time in your life. And other times it hits at entirely the wrong time. Like Harry Potter and Harry Potter Mania. It hit at exactly the wrong time in my life. Because I was not part of, what did you call it? The hype train?
The hype train.
Yeah,
Choo-choo. Yes.
I will add that to my, let's talk about the hype train and how AP sounds odd saying that. There are just some things that you just I'm not comfortable saying them, and that just comes across, and that's one of them. But I am never going to be a fan of Harry Potter ever. Whereas, I know a lot of people who love Harry Potter, and they were the same age as me. But there was something in those books that really struck a chord with them. Whereas I read it and went, wasn't for me.
Yeah, and it is weird because like those things like catch the hype train at Station 1, and it only gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't know about you, but then there's times where I'm like, is something wrong with me? Like, why don't I like this as much? Because I'm with you. So I really enjoyed. I was very young when Harry Potter came out. I'm sure you were really old. I had to zing you back. I had to get that
Philip
little receipt. Well, gee, Philip was like 100 whenever Harry Potter came out, and he's somehow still rolling around. So rude. He's not even here to defend himself. Harry Potter came out, and we read it in school. I loved it. I loved the movie. And then I got to like book 4, and I remember people like, dude, Goblet of Fire was the best. And I was like, I stopped reading it at like 40 pages in because I was like, I don't like this anymore. It was just one day I woke up and I didn't like it anymore. So I've never actually finished reading it. And
weirdly enough, Goblet of Fire is my favorite of the Harry Potter books.
Well, I have terrible taste. We know this. That's why you don't watch my reviews.
You're never going to let me forget that.
Never.
I'm now going to have to make a point of going and commenting on all of your reviews that I've watched now.
I'm just going to say I am going to see you again. That's all I'm saying. I will see you. All right. You're going to need Joanna with the alligator or crocodile or whatever reptile she has, and you have to figure it out. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I was team AP. I was against Philip, and maybe Philip is the right side of things.
That nefarious, dastardly cad. Oh, your true colors have come out. This is like those scenes in pro wrestling where the hero has suddenly been suborned by the dark side and has joined the evil tag team.
It's Stone Cold at WrestleMania 17. which no one will understand the reference but me, but that's fine.
I was making a general sort of comment into the field where I knew you would have specific examples.
Thank you for the softball. I appreciate you. You lobbed one up and you said, "Here, you intellectual ant, go at it. Have your time in the sun."
But one of these days, Jimmy, someone is going to actually believe that I think that about you.
I hope so. I do these openings sometimes and I get really, really arrogant, and I'm just waiting for someone to take it serious and be like, Jimmy is kind of full of himself. Like, those 8,600 subscribers are really gone to his head.
Oh, a bit of a flex there about your channel being much bigger than mine.
I mean, if I'm going to flex, I'm going to say I did appreciate, and I'm being sincere. I actually did appreciate it. You sent me an email after you celebrated your 5,000 subscribers on a live stream. It was your first ever live stream, and you messaged me and you said, "I don't know how you do it," was the subject line. And you said, "That was the most insane thing ever. Good night. I'm going to go sleep for 2 days," or something.
It was like trying to manage talking to someone and listening to them, and trying to find things in the chat and read the chat at the same time. And I have a real problem reading and listening to things at the same time. I can do one or the other. And
it's tough.
So I don't know how you do this, Jimmy. It's a very impressive talent.
Well, it's a losing battle. Like, especially when we get to 120 to 130, it's like, all right. Like, sometimes the chat is just going, and it's usually whenever, we say something that's, flamboyant or whatever, it ends up getting kind of nutty. But it's a losing battle, and you just have to try to balance it. It's really tough. I do wonder, as this thing keeps growing and growing and growing, like, is there going to be a day, like, in 5 years or something, whenever I have, like, 500 people? I don't know how that works at that point. That's going to be really tough.
Well, I'm assuming one of these days, Jimmy, like you're going to be doing Chatting with Nuts live at Wembley, sitting on the stage,
Wembley,
the whole stadium filled, and you're just going, yeah. So just you do the chat there.
The chats have themselves at this point. It's not even. I don't have to try. Well, the reason why I do the live thing is to do something different. Like, I wanted to do a long form kind of conversation here. And at the time when I started it, not a lot of people were doing it. And even to this day, I like a lot of these type of shows have come out and stuff, and they're all great. But I think I'm one of the few that still do it like live all the time. I know Steve Talks Books and stuff does it as well. And I'm sure he knows it's very difficult. So for me, I kind of like the challenge. I kind of like living in that live format. It's probably somewhat from my wrestling past and having to be like, on in front of anywhere between, 10 people to 10,000 people, wherever I was wrestling at the time, and knowing all eyes are on you at that time, and you don't want to mess up, and, you don't want to look like a fool. I've definitely made myself look like more of a fool on this show than I ever did in wrestling, because I was actually good at wrestling. And here I'm just trying to catch up to these intellectual giants. Like a critical dragon. Go away. Who could never be bothered. Kings of the Wild? Never heard of it.
But it's really weird. I mean, I know that there is a sort of impression sometimes, and I think I hope it is a wrong impression that say when Philip and I have our conversations about the Malazan books, and we're talking about theme and we're talking about literary analysis.
Excellent.
That it's because that's how we talk and think about books. It's the thing that we actually enjoy doing. And it's no different from anyone else talking to their friend about the book that they like in the way that they like. That we're doing exactly the same thing. But this is just how we talk about books. And we're never saying you must talk about books this way or you have to think about books this way. But it is genuinely how we talk about books. And I think sometimes it's perceived as, it's snobbery or academic elitism, and you must talk. It's not that, but this is how I think and talk about books. I can't change that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, when we conversated about books, and I try to keep up. I do better than I used to. But I like it because like it shows me that there's like new conversations to be had. The conversation I have with you might be completely different than what I have with someone in my Discord, right? I could sit here and me and you could dive into things that we love about Malazan. And then whenever I talk to Iskar, right? Me and Iskar were like, dude, the fireball. Like, could you believe that? And who's the strongest character in Malazan? I can do all of that. Like, I enjoy it all, and the range is broad. But you do genuinely, like, this is how you talk about books. This is how you like to have your conversations with your friends. It's great.
Because I'm that kind of weirdo. I know that, I accept it. It's I'm not going to try and change who I am now. It's far too late. I can't reinvent myself. But the thing is, I love books. I love films. I love TV shows. I love storytelling. I love different aspects of it.
Yeah.
I always have. It's been this driving passion. And I will never be able to talk about writing the way that, say, Steven Erikson does. He knows writing inside out in a way that I don't.
Oh, the Chatting with Nuts episode with him is like a free workshop, folks. Like, if you haven't seen it, it's amazing. Like, I'm so fortunate that I was able to host that and have that conversation with him. Like, it's one of the highlights of my adult life. I'll be honest. I felt like I learned a lot about that. And like, whenever you talk about a craft like writing, I think it also like can speak to like just you know what I mean?
Yeah, because one of the things, like, in talking to Steve about writing, and obviously the last conversation we had, Ian C. Esselmont was there as well. So it was Steven Erikson and Ian C. Esselmont. Esselmont and Erikson, there's an overlap in the things that they do and how they write, but there are differences as well. And anytime I've ever talked to Erikson about writing, we've always talked about his approach and what he was doing, or one of the ways that you can do this, or what he was taught. And he talks about his approach to writing. And that will resonate for some people. And other people go, I don't want to write that way. And I think Erikson would be among the very first people in the world to go, then don't. Yeah. You have to write the way that makes sense to you. But again, it's not about dictating, this is what you must do. This is what I was taught. This is what I learned. This is what I experienced.
Yeah.
And I can share it with you. And you can do with that information whatever you want. It is not saying you must. It is saying this is one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, sorry, Jimmy.
No, good.
I was going to say, and this is part of the conversation that I love, is that I learn from Erikson. I learn from Esselmont. Looking at Philip's work and how he does it, like, he has his own approach in the things that he does. Talking to Philip about how he understands the Malazan books, and at some point when Philip and I eventually finish the series, you and I are going to have some discussions about the books, sort of from either a reread perspective or from a whole series perspective.
Yes.
But how we talk about it, how we think about it, I can have my impression or my understanding, and then I talk to you, I talk to Iskar, I talk to Philip, or I talk to Erikson, and different things get brought to light, and it stimulates new thought. Now, that doesn't mean that I was wrong, and it doesn't mean that what I thought was invalid, and it doesn't even mean that I have to change what I think, but it gives me a different way of approaching it. And then I can maybe go, well, I'm going to discard that idea because this idea works better.
Yeah, definitely.
And you constantly evolve.
Yeah, one of the things that like really resonated with me was in Florida when Erikson was talking about like an event happening in a story, and how a lot of people are like, okay, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, or like, it goes up and down or whatever. And he's like, really, an event is like, the timeline is a spiral around the event, and how you can revisit different spots on the spiral, and it can mean different things at different times and different perspectives. And like, I don't know, the idea of it being a spiral really like, and it's such a simple thing, and I know other people have said it, whatever, but when he said it to me and the way he said it, like, it just like opened up pathways in my mind that had not been there before. And we were talking about the Siege of Pale specifically, and just saying, that event gets mentioned many times in the series, and from different sides of it, and also like different perspectives and everything. And it's like a spiral.
And that this is something that we find in teaching. Like, sometimes you would go, here's the concept that we are teaching, and you explain it, and the students look at you and they're like,
yeah.
And you go, okay, so using this analogy, let me explain it this way. And some of the students will go, And then other students will go, no, it's
Yeah.
not. And part of the trick was you were always trying to find a way to explain the thing in a way that they understood and it clicked for them, and then they understood the concept, and then once they understood the concept, applying it back to the original thing and go, right, so this is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And someone can make the same point to you multiple times in slightly different ways, and every time. And then for whatever reason, they will say it in such a way that you go, I know exactly why didn't you say that before? And you're going, I did. I kept saying it.
Yeah.
But whatever choice of words that one time made it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you apply, because we've all experienced that.
Oh,
I think
definitely.
everyone can remember a moment like that where either they have said something over and over again and then they've said it a slightly different way and the person goes, oh, that's what you meant. Take that. Now think about it in terms of writing on the page, that you can look at these words on the page and you can go, I just don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. And then you'll look at a phrase and go, oh, I get that. I understand that. That's really obvious. And someone else is sitting there going, but I don't get that. And yet, because I was actually, one of the rare occasions I was on the Malazan subreddit was today. I maybe going maybe once a month, once every couple of months. But someone had commented about, in one of the early talks that Philip and I had done on Gardens of the Moon, we revealed a spoiler. And the thing was, neither Philip nor I thought that it was a spoiler. We thought that this was a piece of information from Gardens of the Moon that was obvious. And this person posted on Reddit saying, was I meant to have worked this out? Like, this wasn't obvious. And I watched this video and AP spoiled this.
That son of a gun.
And I felt really bad because people have mentioned on that video and at other times that this is something that I spoiled for them. And I was sitting there going, I honestly did not mean it to be a spoiler. I thought that this was something that was obvious because when I read the book the first time, I made all of the I made the connections that were there because there's information in the text.
You can solve it I know what you're talking about. You can solve it in the first book.
And for whatever reason, now it's not because I'm some genius level intellect, but for whatever reason, that information stood out. And it stood out in such a way that it clicked. And I went, oh, that's obvious. Because when you see something, it is obvious to you.
Yes.
But when something is obvious to you, it's very hard to think that this is something clever that you have worked out. You assume it's obvious to everyone. And therefore, you don't think that this is a hidden thing. So when we were talking about it, we're like, oh, but it's very clear in the book. And so we blithely went on. So I had to apologize to this person on Reddit because I had ruined this one thing. And I'm like, I'm really sorry.
That's how you know a day went to waste, right? When you have to apologize on Reddit.
But it's so weird because when you are aware of a fact, it's the old thing about quiz shows, and you go, oh, that's an easy question. And it's easy because you already knew the answer. It's in your field and you had the answer just at the top of your head. You go, that's an easy question. And the person going, that's a really difficult question. That's an obscure piece of trivia they were asking. You go, no, it's really obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, he was one of the most famous wrestlers in the late 1990s. Of course, everyone knows that. And I'd be sitting there going, oh, really? You
of course, everyone knew who Hugh Morris was. Nobody knows who Hugh Morris was.
Yeah, totally. Like we're like that.
Well, wait, AP, let me explain it. So his name's Hugh, and his last name's Morris. Hugh Morris? Humorous? See, it's brilliant.
Yeah, genius.
His career did not go anywhere.
It's a bit like, people who have the surname Guest. Like there are people in the world whose surname is Guest. If my surname had been Guest and I'd had a kid, I would have called him Edward because when he grew up, he would have been Mystery Guest.
God damn it! You know the #1 independent wrestler name? Just Insane. Justin Sane. Awful. I've listened. I wrestled around the country. I met like 12 of them. I'm like, this isn't clever, guys. It's coming from the guy named Jimmy Nuts. I mean, it's not that impressive either, right? Maybe I should
Major
shut
pain.
up. Yep. Major pain, 100%.
Corporal punishment.
Yep. Keep going. We got them all day.
It's actually some of the cleverest pun names are in roller derby.
Okay, I can see that.
Roller derby, they have brilliant names. If you're ever stuck for brilliant pun names, go and look up the team rosters for roller derby.
All right. Roller derby is like one branch removed from pro wrestling, really, if you think about it. It's about the same.
Yeah,
shit.
it's real.
I like it says, I'm curious how the chat with Philip, AP, and Jimmy about Jenny Warts are going to be or is going to be. Yeah, I just finished Curse and Miss Wraith today. AP, you haven't started it, right?
I read it before.
Oh, you have?
Just the first book.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying you read the whole series. I was like, oh, shit.
No. The 11th book is just coming out.
That's right. We're just in time.
So no, I read it. Let's just say a while ago. So we Philip and I have a Crippled God and a Sale to do, and as soon as we are done with those, that's when I start reading the Johnny Wirt series as the next series.
Yeah, Philip said early August, but if you guys have a sale to go, I think it might be a little later than August, right?
Well, part of what is slowing me down, because I was actually about to launch into a Crippled God, and an editing thing came up that I had to do, and then some personal stuff in the background. But
okay.
So that slowed me down a little bit. So I'm nearly done with certain commitments, and then most of the Malazan books take me under a week. So if need be, I could probably read the Crippled God and the Seal in 2 weeks.
You're a monster then. Jeez.
But I prefer to take longer. For me, they're far more enjoyable taking your time.
Oh,
but
no,
if
definitely.
Oh,
I'm not even rushing you. I'm actually just trying to figure it out because so Philip, originally it was supposed to be like May. So I started the book and then it was supposed to be June. So I started it in June and then I put it on pause and then I finished it now. And Philip said, we'll do it early August. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't know if it's really going to be early August. I feel like it might be early September.
Well, I can always do it before I do the Crippled God.
Oh no, it does not rush. I'm not putting any pressure on you, but I'm actually trying to figure out when I'm going to read book 2 because September I'm reading Swan Song by Robert McCammon, and I'm also reading Stephen King has a new book coming out, Fairy Tale. I'm really excited about it. I'm a big King fan myself, so trying to figure out. But I read Curse of Mystery and I really enjoyed myself.
All of the books of Johnny Wirtz that I've read before. One of the things that always stuck out in my mind was that she again is one of these people who knows how to write. Like the words on the page, her command over them.
It's a little, it's intimidating, to be honest.
And you know, that is one of the things that I've always enjoyed about writing. In addition to, I like reading fantasy, but I like reading fantasy that has that level of linguistic control, the language,
her vocabulary is absurd.
And that is, and also the connotations and subtext, that word choice as specific as that gives you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and I actually just love the feel of it. It almost feels, and they're not related at all, so I shouldn't even say this, but like it gives me what I thought I would get out of Wheel of Time. I know that sounds really strange, but like this big sprawling fantasy epic, and people are saying like, oh, there's so much to it. And I didn't get that experience for myself whenever I read Wheel of Time, but reading this first book from Jenny Wirtz and Wars of Light and Shadow, I did. I got this feeling of like this opening chapter to this epic, like this true big epic. And it's really exciting. I thought the last 3 chapters were outstanding. I thought they were so good. What a great climax. And really throws at some stuff at you that you have to process. And it changes the character dynamics a lot. But her vocabulary is so vast. I was holding a dictionary next to me as I was reading. You know, I was doing this, just trying to figure out. I learned a bunch of new words. There were times wherever I felt as if I was losing some of that subcontext because I wasn't able to you know what I mean? Like I didn't know the words and how it was being stated. So I felt like I lost a little bit of effect, but that's not a knock on the book. It's a knock on me. But I really enjoyed it. I'm pumped to talk about that with you and Philip and Joanna, and Alan's supposed to be in it, but I confirmed with Alan 2 weeks ago. I was like, Alan, you're not really reading this, are you? And he was like, no, I can't. I have no time. And I'm like, I didn't think so. I didn't think so.
Well, it's like every once in a while, like someone says, "Oh, could you like we're going to be talking about this?" You go, oh, okay, right. Let me fit that in. So the Dresden books. I read the first 4 Dresden books to do a talk.
Yeah.
And those are books actually are books that I enjoy. They are fun and I like them and I like the series, but they would never be books that I would go, if I was going to try to develop my prose and my writing ability, I'll go and have a look at the first 4 Dresden books.
Yeah, I just finished number 5. What a step up. What a step up. I really enjoyed it.
But it's a series that I genuinely enjoy. Now, look, reading it now as an older man, there are aspects of it that are slightly less comfortable for me to read than when, say, I was in my late teens, early 20s, that kind of age where you go, whatever. But now, it's slightly creepy.
Yeah. It is not without some moments that I personally see as a little bit cringy. But yeah, honestly, I enjoyed Dresden more than I thought I would, because I wasn't, and that's one of those series on the YouTube book sphere. I know you don't like the term booktube, that gets a lot of hype. You jump in, oh, you got to read it. And it never really called to me. But I've been reading him alongside Alan. He's trying to keep up. He's trying his best to keep up with me. But after book 5, I'm like, man, it's kind of impressive that this thing's opening up into something much more. Like, and I knew it was coming because everyone tells you about it, but like, I don't know, pretty impressed. And I actually don't hate Butcher's writing style. He also does very blunt, pointed sentences, very short. And I kind of mesh with that a little bit. Not that it's like the greatest thing in the world, but I don't know. I think he does a lot of good.
Yeah, but like that evocation of the detective noir, and you go, that's how the initial one was written. But let me ask you this: so, because obviously I was buying them anytime the new one came out, I bought it. I mean, if I didn't like them, I wouldn't be buying them as they are published. But so Dresden's narrated first person past tense, and the first book is very much written in that form of a case file.
Yes. Okay.
And so who's the narrator?
Dresden. I'm making sure it wasn't a trick question. I had to like.
No, but so at what point of time is he narrating this? When is he writing it down?
I don't know.
Right. And the thing is, he's not. That's the artificial formulation of it. This is not Dresden's memoir that he is writing, but that's the narrative position. That's the conceit, as if it was this thing. But because people sometimes say this about first person narratives, like, but when did they write it down? How did they know that information? And you go, you do realize it's a novel, that it's not real. And this Dresden Files, I think, is a good illustration of this, because Dresden is writing, or you are being narrated this story as if it is happening at that moment, but in the past tense. So like Harry burst through the door, and then stopped and he took it. I'm just gonna burst through. Haha. So that can't be right. Well, did he do it at the end? And you go, well, how did he have perfect recall of exactly what everyone said? You go, he didn't. But people get really bent out of shape when they go, I can't identify the narrator of this. You go, because it's a construct. It's a conceit. And even when it's first person narration, we know Harry is narrating it. He doesn't have perfect recall. We know that. he isn't writing it at any point in time, because we see if he was writing it at the far end after the whole series was finished and he's then sitting down as an old man writing it, why do his views change over the course of the series? Why does his perspective shift over the course of the series?
Right.
Because he's remembering the moment. So obviously in the first book, like, one of the major characters you're introduced to is Karen Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
So if Dresden has known her for years, why then is she introduced the way that she is? And if this is written as his recollection, why isn't it informed by what he knows is going to happen in the future with their friendship? Because that would all shape things. So you can see that it's a conceit, that it isn't real, but it's verisimilitudinous enough to suspend our disbelief and to just go with it as a narrative perspective, as a way to encounter and consume the narrative.
Yeah.
But people get so freaked out trying to work out who a narrator is. And you go, it's not always a person. And even when it appears to be a person, it's not that they physically then sat down and wrote the story.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I felt that way kind of in Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King, which is like his bedtime story type deal he wrote for his kids, that got absolutely destroyed by the critics when he released it. I liked it. But it's like a third person omniscient. It is totally like a bedtime story in some regards. And I saw people talking about it and they're like, well, who's the narrator? And it's like, it's just someone telling you a story, dude. Like, it's fine. I promise. Like, it's okay. I see why there's some disconnect in that, but yeah, I've seen that before. And I hadn't thought about Dresden like that, to be honest with you. Like, I didn't really think about like who's the narrator, because I'm just kind of getting the beats, you know?
And that's it. And again, a lot of this comes from how we think about storytelling, which is oral storytelling. That someone told us a story, and they were the narrator, they were the storyteller, and they told us the story so we could identify them. And they told the story, and then they told the story about someone else's life. And we go, oh, so they're not in it. So we start separating out types of narrator. And then when it comes to written work, we basically take that concept because it is written from a certain perspective. Mm-hmm. And that is going to flavor and shape the text, as we discussed. But because in our head, we have that concept of a person telling the story, and we quite frequently then map it onto the author, and we think author as narrator. But narrator is different than author. The author is the person who wrote it at a certain point in time, but that's not necessarily the narrator, because if you think the book Lolita, it was written by one person, but the narrator is a very different person.
Yeah.
And anyone who's familiar with the book Lolita will know what I mean.
I have not read it, but I want to.
But the author and narrator are very clearly different people. And you go, okay, so the author and narrator aren't conflated. They are different. It's a perspective through which this story is being told. And then suddenly we get all of these things where we try to rationalize. Well, if it's first person, then you go, but this is just as artificial as third person. And again, like talking about omniscient, which we talked about very early on, actually. But omniscience is not that they know everything, because Harry, he's writing if this is his recollection, he is theoretically omniscient about everything that happens in the story.
Yeah.
But I read a book narrated in first person, but from the past. So first person past tense.
Mitch is just trolling.
Analepsis is a flash forward.
I could think of some.
Oh no, analepsis is flashback. Sorry, prolepsis is flash forward.
Yeah, I can think of some books that might fit that, but it's all spoilers, so I can't really say.
But this is the weird thing. So if you think, like, if you imagine in a Dresden book, and again we can use that example. So if Harry burst into the room and then it was and then Lieutenant Smith walked out the door and that was the last I ever saw of him, that line would show you that Harry's perspective is from a different point in the continuum, in the timeline. Because how would he know that?
That's right. I mean,
so
Farseer is a good example of this. Robin Hobb does it in Farseer. She's a that's not really how it continues, but Farseer is him writing down his life.
Well, some of it is, and then some of it is obviously the recollection that
Yes.
at some point he is going to write down.
Yes, it is a recollection. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, the whole thing is like him recording and writing down. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes we get what he actually writes.
Mm-hmm.
And other times we see what he is trying to describe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a wonderful way to play with it. If you're the R.A. Salvatore Dritz books, in the Forgotten Realms, sometimes you get excerpts from Dritz's journal. And you go, and when exactly was he writing in this journal? I've read all of these books when he's swanning around in all of these fights and stuff. And suddenly, and yes, I was writing, and then we were captured. You go, and they let you keep your journal, did they? Oh, I picked it up at a later date. Well, how does it have all of the early stuff in it that you'd written previously? Oh, I just rewrote it all from the beginning. You know, as soon as you think of the actual reality of it, the fictive construct breaks apart and it makes no sense. So we buy into that conceit. We buy into that convenience. And you just go, yeah, you just go with it. But if we start fixating on it and scratching, again, like sort of scratching at the surface to drill down to, if this was a real person, you go, no, it all falls apart. And that's okay. That's why you don't scratch at the surface of these things, but it's a way to understand the text.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a certain amount of convenience that you have to accept to suspend belief, right? Like that is going to happen, and it's kind of the agreement. It's the handshake, right?
Well, and how many books have you read where everyone on the planet speaks the same language, or they speak the trader's tongue? There's only one, and they all speak it. Because and not every author does this, but some authors do, because that's not the thing that they're focused on.
Yeah. Jennifer says, this discussion reminds me of my first read of Plague of Giants by Kevin Hearn and working through who is narrated. Yeah, I that book played with narrator a lot, and I really, really like that book.
Well, even his Iron Druid Chronicles, he starts playing with a style of narration, like first person. One's in first person present, one's in third person past, depending on who the character is. That their sections are always written in a different style to the other characters.
Yeah.
John Scalzi does it in the codas to Red Shirts.
I've heard that's very good, by the way. I would like to read his books. And Old Man's War.
And well, Forever War by Joe Haldeman I'd read first.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then read Old Man's War.
Okay, I see. Is it an inspired work?
Scalzi said he's never read Haldeman.
Do you believe him?
I have no reason to doubt him.
All right, fair enough. I was just curious.
People have similar ideas and explore them in different ways all the time.
Never.
But I've lost my train of thought what we were talking about in terms of narration.
I think we were just talking about the narrator's voice, like who is saying this, talking about Dresden and that kind of thing. And you put it wonderfully. Like, honestly, I'd never really thought about that, which is weird because like there are series wherever like there's like aha moments where you're like, oh, I should be wondering who's telling me the story. And if they're like the unreliable narrator, I mean, I love that device. It's like one of my favorite things.
And there are levels of unreliability to narration. A first person perspective, by definition, is always going to be unreliable to a certain extent.
Yes.
And that's why you have trustworthy and untrustworthy as additional things to the reliability, because Harry is not going to lie to you on purpose. Harry as a narrator he's trustworthy, but also unreliable. Like, he's honest but unreliable. And the reason he's unreliable is he has limited knowledge. He doesn't know everything that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So he can walk into a scene, open the door, and it's the classic comedy thing of the worst moment to walk in, the compromising position, that it was a perfectly innocent thing that had happened, but just at that moment when you walk in, it clearly looks like something bad. Like wrestling over a pickle jar, and then suddenly they've both fallen over. They're lying on top of each other on the ground, covered in pickles or something, and it's some sort of bizarre love thing. And Harry walks in, aha, I've caught you covered in pickle juice, the way that
the pickle bandit.
Yeah. And so clearly, like, if we are with his perspective, he opens the door and they are in flagranti delicto on the ground, covered in pickle juice, and that's clearly what he sees.
Yeah,
but he's wrong. He can be wrong. So it's unreliable in the fact that he can be wrong, whereas you can also have unreliable when the narrator's lying to you.
Yeah.
Or lying to themselves, and we're hearing their thoughts. So there's levels to unreliability.
Yeah, there's a lot to play with there. It's a pretty powerful device. Omar has a question. He says, "What do you prefer between Dresden and Iron Druid Chronicles AP?"
Well, there are certain aspects of the Iron Druid Chronicles that I really enjoyed. And there are certain aspects of Dresden that I enjoyed. I kept up with Dresden. I didn't keep up with Iron Druid. But part of that was the names were all so similar. I ended up buying 2 copies of the same book.
That's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate.
They're around there somewhere behind something. But it's alphabetical. But it's like hexed and hunted and whatever it was, that they all had very similar names. And I went, oh, look, there's a new one. And I ordered it. And I went, I already have this one.
I have ordered the same book many times.
And so I just, you know what, I'll wait for a while. And then at some point I would just do a reread of them all and then just buy, while I'm sitting there with it, just buy all the next one. Mm-hmm. But he did some interesting stuff. I always find it weird when people use stuff from Celtic mythology.
John Quinn did in The Faithful and the Fallen. Yeah, he.
But there's a difference between someone from this part of the world doing it and someone in a radically different country and context doing it. American authors using it's absolutely fine. I'm not complaining about it, but I always find it weird when an American author has this sort of approach to Irish mythology.
Yeah.
It's harder for me to accept. So particularly like an Irish druid living in Arizona, you're like, yeah, lots of Irish people go, yeah, I want to live in the desert. I'm gonna be an Aiel. Like, why people think that all of these Peel people are going to go and live in the desert? I don't know.
It doesn't seem as desirable of a location, right? Mitch asks, are there third-person narrations about people that speak in third person? Krupp. Lassen. And I guarantee that was
and that's not even like an invention that Erickson came up with. There are many authors have done. One of the things that I miss actually about having a readily identified, because of this movement in fantasy towards the third person limited sort of camera perspective, I miss snarky narrators.
Mm-hmm.
I miss narrators like being past remarkable about the things that happen on the page, where it is very much someone is telling you a story. I miss that so much.
Yeah, I find it refreshing whenever I run into it now, because it's like, oh man, no one's doing this anymore. Well, I shouldn't say no one, but like a lot of things I read aren't doing it anymore.
And that's it. Things fall in and out of favor. They eventually will cycle back around again. But having that very distinctive voice, because there was this movement towards transparency, accessibility, and the lack of even color to a lot of the language to try and be true to the story. And you know, like, there are other ways of telling a story. And I liked snarky narrators.
I believe this. I can see you like snarky narrators.
But it's one of the things that's just changed over time, that we see these changes. Weird.
And it'll probably come back. You know, everything cycles. It's just the way of the thing, of everything, really. And I personally look forward to more third person omniscient. I love third person omniscient. It's like my favorite. First person past, you know, it can be so personable. This is great. But third person omniscient, I don't know. There's just a lot you can do with it. It poses a lot of different challenges from the writer's perspective. And when I see people tackle it, I'm always like really impressed with it.
And yet it was incredibly common.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. do.
And like all of these, there are the usual strengths and weaknesses of every narrative perspective that you pick. People will say first person immediately draws the reader in, makes it far more personal, and you just can't do that in third person. And then someone like M. John Harrison is going to go, hold my beer, and he will do a third person that you're immediately drawn in, and you're engrossed in it. Someone say, oh, you can't write in second person, and then N.K. Jemisin goes, hold my beer, and does it, and you go, oh, this is
fantastic.
Amazing. Yeah. Someone said, oh, third person limited is it. There's only certain things that you can do, and you go, well, every author who knows the technique, understands the different effects of it. They understand what happens when you push it in different directions. They understand what they're doing with it, and so they can manipulate it. And this is what I was talking about in terms of like the post-colonial theory about adopt, adapt, adapt. When a lot of the Anglo-Irish authors, the Irish authors who wrote in English, were forced to learn English and write in English, and it was, well, okay, if this is how we have to do it, we're going to write in English better than the English. It was kind of a one-up. You say these are the rules of the novel, right? Let's see what we can do with the rules of the novel in English. Then you say this is how grammar works. I am going to show you how your grammar works. And that playfulness, it was like a challenge, and the playfulness, and they started to bend and twist it in weird and wonderful ways because they were approaching it in that sort of way. And so when someone says to an author, oh, if you want to do that, you must do first person. Some authors take it as a challenge and go, really? What can I do? Can I do this a different way? And this was, if you think of the experimentation in the postmodernist writing, even, where it was very, very common in a lot of the short stories and some of the science fiction stories, that was part of the playfulness, seeing how far you could push the boundaries of what storytelling was, what narrative was, and messing around with it. And that was absolutely fascinating then to see, someone write a story and they go, okay, I'm going to write this without using any actual characters. Can I write a story without characters? Can I write a story without punctuation? Can I write a story with it? And they had a go. They stretched themselves, because by breaking those rules and even falling flat on their face with some of them, they learned about the craft of writing.
Yeah. And that's how you grow.
Or fall flat in your face and go, I'm never getting up again. It's too embarrassing.
It's crazy, just like all of the things that go into the stories that we love. And sometimes I think it's a lot more purposeful than people realize. And that a lot of these masterpieces or things that really resonate with us are not done by accident, but through lots and lots of trial and error, and figuring out what that style is, or as I always say, the secret sauce that's going to click with a lot of readers. And this is a pretty good example of it.
But like, even when you're writing, and you do this, you sit down and you write, and you go, there's something wrong with that sentence. Yeah. Or and then I bet you've had that feeling where you've written a sentence down and you went, nailed it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then when people read the story, they were like, I like that sentence. I'm like, I knew that was a banger. I knew.
And you're looking at it, and now what for me, a lot of what the craft of writing is understanding why that sentence is good, but the one above it is not. And you go, how can this sentence, I can feel it, there's something about it, it just works. And it's the craft of writing, is knowing the tools, knowing the names for the different things, knowing how that effect was achieved, that you go, I know how I did that now. I can do it with the next sentence now as well, because I know what I'm doing. Because you can strike it lucky, that inspiration strikes, or the muse strikes, or whatever it is, and for whatever reason, you get lucky and you have lots of those good sentences, or, when it's flowing and you go, oh yeah, every word I am putting onto this page is fire.
It's sucking diesel.
And then other days you're sitting there going, I force a single word out of this pen. The ink will not flow. And professional authors, well, they all have different approaches to it. But they'll write down and go, yeah, that didn't work out. But tomorrow I can look at it and I can fix it.
Yeah. Everything changed when you wake up. Everything. I've had at work when I have a coding problem and I get stuck on a bug or something. I've literally like racked my brain for 8 hours in a day. Now figured it out. Then I go home, I go to sleep, wake up the next day, fix it first thing in the morning. I'm like, where was this?
Where was this all day yesterday?
Yeah, seriously though.
And there are technical aspects to writing. There's also the artistic aspect. It is a balance between them. And then you can throw in the market commodification.
Yeah, which Le Guin warned us against, the commercialization.
But, authors have to make a living. Authors,
damn right,
have to be able to eat and keep a roof over their heads.
That's right. And, if people like it, they like it. It is what it is, right?
Jimmy, I've just realized it's 2:45 in the morning for me.
I was about to say, AP, I love talking to you, but I think I'm going to let you go to sleep. AP graciously came on here, folks. Give him a round of applause. Put some fire emojis in the chat. Put some dragons in the chat for a critical dragon. Giving us his best performance at 3 a.m., which is just absolutely asinine. AP, I love having you on. I love talking about this stuff. You always bring a new perspective, and you're always just dropping knowledge bombs, man. You're on that knowledge hype train that we were talking about, Yeah,
yes, the hype train.
Steve says, what a wuss.
Says the guy that's 8 hours behind me.
This was awesome. This was great, man. I love having you on. It will not be as long next time. And I think next time maybe we do like a Saturday, middle of my day, maybe your evening, and we try to time it out a little bit better, because I always feel guilty keeping you up so late at night.
Yeah, after a full day's work.
Oh, don't rub it in. Jeez. Well, the perfect sleep remedy for you, you should flip on some reviews from the Fantasy Network. Word salad, it'll put you right to sleep.
Except I heard that they are enthralling, and they're how reviews ought to be written.
Reviews as they ought to be written. Georgie Boy himself told me, so it is what it is. The channel's peaked at this point, folks.
So Jimmy, thank you very much for inviting me on. I have so much fun, and I think maybe we'll have you on my channel, and we'll do a wee bit more of actual. Maybe put up a passage from something that you really like, and we'll go through it, and we'll do some close reading or something like that to have a bit of fun with it.
Yes, and then once you wrap up Malazan the main 10, let's talk about it on your channel, man. Let's do a little discussion. We can even bring in that dastardly bastard Philip. AP, very much, Jimmy. Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on, chat. Thank you for being here and being the third guest. I love you guys so much, and it's always a pleasure to see you guys here. And I appreciate all the support in the chat. Make sure to hit like on this video so more people can get the knowledge that AP's putting out there, and make sure to go subscribe to his channel and check out everything that he's been putting out. His recent talk with Steve Erickson and Ice I always call him Ice. Ian Esselmont, oh my goodness, was fantastic about prose and style and voice and all these things. So go check that out. AP, we love you here at the Fantasy Network, and we hope to have you back again real soon, man.
I know.
Yep. So I see you guys next time. Be good, be safe. Remember to always keep turning the page.